At 17, they put a newborn in my arms and told me no one claimed her. I gave up my premed scholarship. I worked 3 jobs. I raised her. Then on a random Tuesday, a woman knocked on my door holding a DNA test. She looked at the 8-year-old girl behind me and sobbed. "I have been looking for her since the hospital. Your mother told me she died." I dialed my mother right then, put the phone on speaker, and watched my entire life unravel in real time. My name is Chloe. I am 25 years old. Before I tell you what my mother said through that speaker, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe the truth always finds a way out. It was a Tuesday evening in late October, the kind of night where the Chicago wind bites through your coat. I stood in my small kitchen draining pasta, while Maya, my 8-year-old, sat at the island working on a science project. We had a quiet rhythm, just the 2 of us against the world. That was the narrative my parents fed me 8 years ago when they brought a nameless infant into our living room. My mother, Brenda, was a prominent hospital administrator back then. She claimed a transient patient abandoned the baby and begged me to take her in to save her from the foster system. I surrendered my youth, my college dreams, and my freedom. Then the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door. A woman stood on my porch. She looked to be in her late 20s, wearing a rain-soaked trench coat. Her hands trembled, holding a crumpled folder. She did not introduce herself. Her eyes bypassed me entirely, landing straight on Maya, sitting at the kitchen counter. The resemblance hit me like a physical blow. The same almond-shaped eyes, the same distinct curve of the jaw. The stranger pressed a hand to her mouth, letting out a ragged sound that was half relief and half pure agony. She stepped forward, pushing a piece of paper into my chest. "It is a DNA match," she whispered. I never gave her up. I never abandoned her. I have searched every day for 8 years. My pulse pounded in my ears. I pulled the woman inside, away from the cold wind, and locked the door. Maya looked up, dropping her crayon. I told Maya to go watch television in her room. Once the door clicked shut, I turned back to the stranger. She introduced herself as Sienna. She told me a story that defied logic. A story about waking up in a recovery ward and being told her healthy baby had not survived the night. She said the hospital administrator delivered the news personally. My hands moved on autopilot. I grabbed my phone and dialed my mother. Brenda always answered by the second ring. I placed the phone on the kitchen island and tapped the speaker button. "Hi, darling Brenda," answered her tone, bright and polished as always. "Maya and I are making dinner," I said, keeping my voice eerily calm. "But we have a guest. Her name is Sienna. She says you told her the baby died." The silence stretching through the speaker was heavy. The cheerful facade vanished instantly. I heard the sharp intake of breath, the clatter of something dropping onto a hardwood floor in my childhood home. "Who?" Brenda asked, her voice dropping an octave stripped of all its usual warmth. "Sienna," I repeated. "She is standing in my kitchen with a DNA test." A low, frantic hiss came through the receiver. "Lock your doors, Chloe. Get Maya away from her. Do not listen to a word she says. She is a dangerous woman trying to extort us." But Sienna did not argue with the speakerphone. She simply reached into her damp folder and pulled out a yellowed carbon copy of a hospital discharge form. She slid it across the marble counter. I looked down at the ink. The document was dated 8 years ago, the exact week Maya was brought to my house. Under the section labeled Temporary Guardian Authorization was my mother's distinct flowing signature. Brenda had personally signed the infant out of the maternity ward. My mother kept shouting through the phone, demanding I call the police. I stared at the signature, feeling the ground drop beneath my feet. At 17, I thought I was performing an act of grace. At 25, staring at the undeniable proof on my kitchen counter, I realized the chilling reality. My parents did not give me a child to save. They gave me a hostage to hide. I pressed the end call button and set the phone face down on the marble counter. The silence left behind was suffocating. I stared at the faded ink on the discharge paper. The signature looped and confident belonged to the woman who raised me. My hands moved before my brain could fully process the betrayal. I walked past Sienna and slid the heavy brass deadbolt on the front door into place. I checked the chain lock. I pulled the living room blinds shut tight against the Chicago night. Every click of a lock felt like a physical strike against the reality I had known. 8 years of my life had been built on a foundation of manufactured pity. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window and closed my eyes. The memory hit me with ruthless clarity. I was 17 years old, standing in our suburban hallway, holding a thick envelope from Northwestern University. It was a full-ride pre-med scholarship. I was going to be a surgeon. I had mapped out my entire future. Then the front door opened. My father, Gregory, stepped inside, holding a bundle wrapped in a cheap hospital blanket. Brenda followed right behind him, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. They sat me down on the sofa and placed the fragile, red-faced newborn in my arms. Gregory told me a tragic story about a drug-addicted patient who had wandered into Brenda's hospital, delivered a baby, and vanished into the night. They looked at me with pleading eyes. They said the child was destined for the foster system, where she would be chewed up and forgotten. They told me I had a rare gift for empathy. They convinced me that stepping up to raise this unwanted child was a calling higher than any medical degree. I believed them. I let the Northwestern deadline pass. While my peers attended freshman orientation, I learned how to mix formula on a strict budget. I traded my textbooks for 3 different minimum wage jobs. I worked morning shifts at a diner smelling like stale coffee and bacon grease. I stocked retail shelves in the afternoon. I tutored struggling high school students late into the night. Every dollar went to diapers, pediatrician visits, and keeping a roof over Maya. My parents offered nothing but hollow praise. They called me selfless while keeping their wallets firmly shut. Yet their bank accounts were wide open for my older sister, Lauren. Lauren was the golden child. While I counted pennies to buy winter coats for a toddler, Lauren packed designer luggage for a semester abroad in Italy. Brenda paid her tuition in full. Gregory covered her rent in an upscale downtown apartment. They bought her a new car for graduation, while I rode the city bus with a stroller. Lauren currently lives in a sprawling penthouse draped in luxury. She married Jamal, a highly successful African-American real estate attorney. Jamal is a powerhouse in the city, known for closing multi-million-dollar commercial deals. He built his firm from the ground up through sheer grit and intellect. Whenever our family gathered for holidays, I noticed Jamal sitting back and observing my parents with a quiet, calculating gaze. He never openly criticized them, but he rarely engaged in their superficial bragging. He treated me with a quiet respect that my own flesh and blood never bothered to show. I always wondered what a man of his caliber saw in a family so steeped in vanity. Lauren used to visit me once a year, usually bringing a discarded sweater or a leftover gift basket, acting like she was performing charity work. She would look around my modest apartment, sigh dramatically, and tell me how brave I was for living such a difficult life. She played the sympathetic sister perfectly while spending our parents' money. Now staring at the weeping woman in my kitchen, I realized the depth of the illusion. My sacrifices were not an act of nobility. They were the result of a calculated scheme. Sienna was standing right in front of me, breathing and grieving, proving that the addict mother story was a complete fabrication. Why would Brenda and Gregory force their teenage daughter to raise a stranger's baby? Why steal my future to hide this child? Sienna hugged her trench coat tighter around her frail shoulders. She looked terrified of her own shadow. She began to speak, her voice shaking with years of repressed trauma. She told me she was young back then. She said there was a man, a powerful man. Before she could finish her sentence, a harsh mechanical sound pierced the air. Flashing red and blue lights swept across the closed blinds, throwing jagged shadows against my living room wall. Heavy boots slammed onto the wooden planks of my front porch. Chloe opened this door. The voice belonged to my father. Gregory pounded his fist against the wood so hard the doorframe rattled. Maya called out from her bedroom down the hall. Her small voice trembled, asking what the loud noises were. I spun around and signaled for Sienna to stay completely out of sight in the kitchen shadow. I moved to the hallway and told Maya to stay under her blankets and keep her headphones on. I walked back to the front window and peered through a narrow slit in the blinds. Gregory stood on my porch, wearing his expensive tailored overcoat. Flanking him were two uniformed police officers. One of the officers had his hand resting on his utility belt. "Chloe, open up right now," Gregory shouted. His tone was not concerned. It was commanding and laced with a threatening edge. "I know she is in there. Do not let her near my granddaughter." The police officer knocked next. "Ma'am, this is the Chicago Police Department. We received a frantic call from your father stating a delusional woman forced her way into your home. Please unlock the door so we can secure the premises." My pulse skyrocketed. Gregory had not just rushed over here. He had orchestrated a preemptive strike. He called law enforcement and framed Sienna as an unhinged intruder before I could even process the DNA test. He was using the police as his personal security detail to retrieve the loose end they thought they had buried 8 years ago. Sienna backed into the corner of the kitchen, her eyes wide with sheer panic. "They are going to take me away," she whispered, tears spilling over her eyelashes. "They told me if I ever came looking, they would lock me up." I looked at the discharge paper on the counter. Then I looked at the heavy deadbolt separating me from the men outside. Gregory was banking on my lifelong obedience. He expected the dutiful daughter who gave up her medical career without a fight to simply open the door and hand over his problem. He brought badges and uniforms to intimidate me into compliance. If I opened that door, Sienna would be arrested for trespassing or worse. Maya would be exposed to the chaos. The evidence would vanish into Gregory's pockets. I stepped back from the window. I grabbed the DNA test and the hospital document off the counter and shoved them into the deep pocket of my cardigan. "Ma'am," the officer called out again, his voice growing stern. "If you do not open the door, we will have to breach it for your own safety." I took a deep breath, letting the lingering naive girl inside me die completely. I turned to Sienna and pointed toward the back hallway that led to the alley. I was not going to let them win. The pounding on my front door reverberated through the hardwood floors, sending a physical tremor up my spine. My father stood on the other side, demanding entry, with a voice that brokered no defiance. Gregory did not sound like a concerned parent checking on his child. He sounded like a warden who had just discovered an open cell. "Officers, you need to breach this door," Gregory shouted, his tone shifting into a practiced, synthetic panic. "My daughter is inside with a delusional woman. This intruder has a history of stalking our family. I hold the legal adoption papers for the minor child in that house." The blood drained from my face. My grip on the deadbolt slipped. Legal adoption papers. For 8 years, my parents told me informal guardianship was the safest route to keep social services away. They claimed filing official paperwork would draw unwanted attention to Maya and risk her being taken from me. They lied. They had secretly forged and filed official adoption documents, keeping the legal rights to Maya locked away in their own names. I was never her mother in the eyes of the law. I was just an unpaid, glorified babysitter harboring a child they legally owned. "Ma'am," a deep voice called out, belonging to one of the officers, "your father has provided court-certified documentation establishing his custody of the child. He reports a home invasion. Unlock the door, or we will be forced to kick it down." They were using the police as their personal retrieval squad. Gregory brought badges and guns to intimidate me into handing over the living proof of his deceit. If I turned the knob, Sienna would be handcuffed and hauled away to a holding cell. The DNA test would vanish into my father's tailored pockets. Maya would be ripped from my arms and returned to the very people who faked her death. I leaned close to the wood, keeping my voice sharp and steady. "Officers, I am the homeowner. There is no intruder here. I am safe, and the child is safe. If you damage my property without a warrant signed by a judge, I will file a lawsuit against the city by morning. I want your badge numbers shouted through this door right now." A brief, heavy hesitation hung in the chilly air. I heard the scuff of boots shifting on the porch. The officer muttered something to his partner about calling the precinct to verify the custody dispute before forcing entry. I knew that hesitation would only buy me a handful of minutes. Gregory would not take no for an answer. He would escalate. I spun around and grabbed Sienna by the sleeve of her trench coat. I pulled her toward the dark corridor leading to the bedrooms. I found Maya huddled under her dinosaur blanket, clutching her favorite stuffed bear. Her wide brown eyes stared up at me, filled with unspoken questions. I scooped her into my arms, pressing a finger to my lips. We moved silently through the narrow kitchen, bypassing the flashing red and blue lights that sliced through the front window blinds. I unlatched the heavy back door that opened into a narrow alleyway behind my property. The Chicago wind hit us instantly, biting through my thin cardigan. I ushered Sienna and Maya down the wooden steps, keeping to the shadows of the brick wall. We hurried past overflowing dumpsters and broken pavement until we reached my rusted sedan, parked under a flickering street lamp. I buckled Maya into the back seat, handing her a tablet to keep her quiet. Sienna slid into the passenger side, shaking uncontrollably as she locked her door. I turned the ignition, praying the old engine would not stall. The car sputtered to life. I kept the headlights off until we merged onto the main avenue, putting a dozen city blocks between us and the flashing police cruisers. The heater groaned, pushing lukewarm air into the freezing cabin. I merged onto the expressway, having no destination in mind other than getting away from Gregory. The streetlights illuminated Sienna's pale, tear-streaked face. She kept looking over her shoulder, terrified a squad car would appear in our rearview mirror. "Why does your father have police?" Sienna whispered, her voice cracking. "Why does he have papers claiming he owns my baby?" I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. "Because my parents are hiding something much bigger than a random abandoned infant," I replied. "You need to tell me the truth, Sienna. Every single detail. Why did my mother target you at that hospital?" Sienna hugged her knees to her chest. She looked out the window at the passing city skyline. Her breathing hitched as she transported herself back to a nightmare she had lived 8 years ago. "I was 16, she began. "A runaway. I got a job working as a maid through an agency that did not ask too many questions. I cleaned a massive estate in the suburbs. The family was incredibly wealthy. Untouchable." She paused, swallowing hard. "The man of the house noticed me. He was powerful and terrifying. He cornered me in the laundry room one evening when the rest of the staff had gone home. He assaulted me. My stomach plummeted. I kept my eyes on the dark road, bracing myself for the impact of her next words. "Who was he?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper. "His name is Desmond Sterling," Sienna replied. The name hit me like a freight train. I nearly swerved into the adjacent lane. Desmond Sterling, a billionaire real estate mogul, a man whose face graced the covers of business magazines. But the horror went far deeper than his wealth. Desmond Sterling was Jamal's father. Jamal, the charismatic, high-powered attorney who married my older sister Lauren. The scattered puzzle pieces of my ruined life snapped together, forming a picture so grotesque it made me physically nauseous. Sienna continued, her voice trembling. "When I realized I was pregnant, I tried to hide it. But Desmond found out. He did not want a scandal ruining his empire. His fixers grabbed me and took me to a private clinic where your mother worked as the head administrator. They kept me locked in a room. When the contractions started, your mother gave me an injection. Everything went blurry. I woke up 2 days later." Brenda stood over my bed and handed me a cremation certificate. She said my baby girl choked on the umbilical cord. She gave me an envelope of cash and told me if I ever spoke of the child, Desmond Sterling would ensure I disappeared. I pulled the car onto the shoulder of the empty highway, putting the vehicle in park. I sat there listening to the rhythmic clicking of the hazard lights. My parents did not rescue a baby from a drug addict. They brokered a black market deal to erase a billionaire's illegitimate child. They aided and abetted a sexual predator. Brenda used her authority at the clinic to fake a death certificate while Gregory forged the adoption papers. They took the infant and handed her to their gullible teenage daughter, manipulating my empathy to secure a free, silent caretaker. But the sheer sociopathy of their scheme did not end there. Why did they do it? Why risk prison for Desmond Sterling? The answer was sitting in a luxury penthouse downtown. Lauren. My parents sold my future to buy my sister's way into high society. They used the leverage of the stolen baby to extort Desmond Sterling. They did not just get cash, they got social elevation. They brokered a marriage. They positioned their golden child Lauren to meet and marry Jamal Sterling, the legitimate heir to the empire. They traded my college degree, my 20s, and my freedom to secure a billionaire son-in-law. Every time Lauren looked around my cramped apartment with pity, she was standing on the ashes of my dreams. Every time my parents called me a burden for struggling to buy groceries, they were sitting on a fortune built from my exploitation. Maya, the little girl drawing pictures in my back seat, was not just a child I saved. She was Jamal's half-sister. She was the living, breathing evidence of the Sterling family's darkest sin. A primal, blinding rage ignited in my chest. It burned away the last remnants of the fearful, obedient daughter I had been conditioned to be. My parents had orchestrated a masterpiece of human trafficking and extortion, masking it as a charitable family endeavor. They turned me into a human vault to guard their dirty secret. I shifted the car back into drive. I did not head toward a cheap motel or a police precinct. I knew the authorities were already compromised. If Gregory could summon police to my porch with forged papers, he could easily have Sienna arrested the moment we walked into a station. "Where are we going?" Sienna asked, wiping her eyes as I accelerated down the highway. I glanced at the dashboard clock. It was 8 in the evening. Tonight, Lauren and Jamal were hosting a lavish housewarming party at their new custom-built estate. My parents would be there clinking champagne glasses with the city elite. Desmond Sterling would be there shaking hands and performing the role of the proud patriarch. "We are going to a party," I said, my tone devoid of any warmth. "It is time to return the gift my parents gave me." I left Sienna and Maya at a cash-only motel on the western edge of the city limits. I paid for 2 nights under a fake name, handed Sienna the room key, and told her to keep the deadbolt thrown until I returned. Driving back toward the affluent North Shore suburbs, my grip on the steering wheel left my knuckles aching. The adrenaline coursing through my veins burned away any lingering fear. My parents had orchestrated a human trafficking scheme disguised as a charitable act, and I was about to set their pristine world on fire. Lauren and Jamal lived in a gated community where the driveways were lined with imported oak trees, and the security guards memorized the license plates of the residents. I did not bother trying to sneak in. I tailgated a catering van through the wrought iron gates before they could swing shut. I pulled my rusted sedan up the circular driveway of their sprawling glass and steel mansion, parking directly behind a row of polished luxury vehicles. I tossed my keys to a bewildered valet who looked at my damp cardigan and worn-out jeans with clear disdain. I ignored him and marched up the bluestone steps. The heavy double doors were propped open to welcome the city elite. The foyer smelled of expensive catered food and fresh orchids. A jazz trio played a smooth melody in the corner of the massive open-concept living room. Waiters in crisp white shirts circulated with silver trays of champagne flutes. I scanned the crowd. Dozens of investors, socialites, and political figures mingled under the vaulted ceilings. Then I spotted my targets gathered near a towering marble fireplace. Lauren stood in the center, wearing a designer silk dress, holding a crystal glass, laughing at a joke someone had just made. My father, Gregory, stood beside her, patting a wealthy developer on the shoulder. My mother, Brenda, held court with a group of older women, her posture radiating manufactured grace. Standing slightly apart from them, nursing a glass of scotch, was Jamal. He looked impeccable, in a tailored charcoal suit, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Jamal always observed more than he spoke, analyzing the shifting dynamics of his social circle. And seated in a velvet armchair right next to the fire was Desmond Sterling, the billionaire predator who had set this entire nightmare in motion. I did not scream. Shouting would only give them a reason to dismiss me as unhinged. I walked straight through the crowd, my wet shoes squeaking slightly against the polished hardwood floors. Conversations died as guests noticed my intrusion. The parting sea of elite guests created a direct path to the fireplace. Brenda saw me first. The polite smile froze on her face. Her eyes darted to my disheveled appearance, and a flash of genuine panic broke through her carefully maintained facade. Gregory turned, following her gaze. He stepped forward, trying to intercept me before I reached the center of the room. "Chloe, what are you doing here?" Gregory hissed, keeping his voice low enough so the surrounding guests would not hear. "I told you to stay at the house." I bypassed him entirely, stepping right into the middle of their tight circle. Lauren lowered her champagne flute, her lips parting in shock. Desmond Sterling looked up from his armchair, his expression morphing from boredom to mild irritation. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the yellowed hospital discharge form, and slapped it flat onto the marble coffee table sitting between them. The sharp smack echoed over the jazz music. "You dropped something 8 years ago, Brenda," I said, my voice carrying a lethal calm. Brenda stared at the paper. The blood abandoned her cheeks, leaving her looking like a ghost. Gregory lunged forward to snatch the document, but I slammed my hand down over it, keeping it pinned to the marble. Lauren reacted with the practiced speed of a woman who had spent her entire life manipulating reality. She quickly stepped in front of me, blocking the view of the curious guests nearby. She put on a mask of deep, tragic sympathy. "Chloe, please," Lauren said, her tone dripping with fake maternal concern. "Have you stopped taking your medication again?" She turned to the nearest guests, shaking her head sadly. "I am so sorry, everyone. My sister struggles with severe delusions and jealousy. She has these episodes when she forgets where she is. It was the perfect Darvo tactic. Deny attack and reverse victim and offender." Lauren was trying to paint me as a mentally unstable relative ruining her perfect evening. In the past, I would have shrunk back from the public humiliation. Tonight, her words meant nothing. I looked Lauren dead in the eye. "I am not delusional, Lauren. But you are funding this mansion with blackmail money." Brenda gestured frantically to a pair of private security guards standing near the hallway. "Escort her out right now," Brenda ordered, her voice trembling. "She is having a psychotic break. She poses a threat to the guests." The heavy-set guards moved in, reaching for my arms. I did not back down. I pointed a finger directly at the paper on the table. "That is your signature, Brenda," I stated, raising my voice just enough to ensure the people nearby heard me. "Authorizing the release of an infant you told the real mother was dead. You faked a death certificate to hide Desmond Sterling's illegitimate child and used me as an unpaid warden." Desmond shifted in his chair, his eyes narrowing dangerously. The mention of his name sent a ripple of shocked whispers through the surrounding crowd. Before the guards could grab my shoulders, a dark hand reached out and picked up the fragile yellow document. "Jamal." The guards hesitated, waiting for a cue from the man of the house. Jamal adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and held the paper up to the light. He did not look at my mother's signature first. As a meticulous real estate and corporate attorney, his trained eyes went straight to the official embossed seals at the bottom of the page. He rubbed his thumb over the notary stamp. The atmosphere in the room grew suffocatingly tense. Jamal looked from the paper to Gregory, his sharp features tightening into an expression of profound suspicion. "Apex Holdings, LLC." Jamal read aloud, his deep, resonant voice cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. Gregory swallowed hard, stepping back. "Jamal, give that to me. It is forged nonsense." Jamal ignored him, keeping the document out of Gregory's reach. "You asked me to file tax extensions for this exact shell company 3 years ago, Gregory. You told me it was a defunct property management firm. Why is a defunct property management firm's notary stamp validating a hospital discharge record for a newborn baby?" The legal implication hit Jamal with brutal clarity. The notary was fake. The paperwork was forged using a corporate entity Gregory controlled to bypass the state adoption registry. Jamal was a man who built his career on uncovering financial fraud and contract discrepancies. He was holding physical proof that his father-in-law was running an illicit operation. Brenda stepped uncomfortably close to Jamal. The polite, loving mother-in-law facade vanished entirely. Her face twisted into a mask of pure malice. She lowered her voice to a lethal whisper intended only for Jamal, Lauren, and me. "Put that paper down," Jamal, Brenda hissed. "You are launching your campaign for city council next month. The Sterling Family Political Action Committee and my husband's private donors are funding your entire run. Do not throw your political future away for the psychotic ramblings of a bitter girl." It was a blatant threat. She was leveraging his ambition against his integrity. She assumed Jamal would choose power over justice, just like Lauren always did. Jamal stared down at Brenda. He looked at the document, then shifted his gaze toward his own father, sitting in the armchair. Desmond looked back at his son, offering a cold, warning glare. The gears in Jamal's mind clicked into place. He recognized the timeline. He recognized the players. He realized that the fortune funding his wife's lavish lifestyle was blood money extorted from his own father. Lauren grabbed Jamal's arm, her manicured fingers digging into his suit jacket. "Please, Jamal," she pleaded, her voice dropping its performative edge. "Just give the paper to my dad and let security handle Chloe. We can fix this later." Jamal looked down at his wife's hand, then up at me. He saw the fire in my eyes, the exhaustion in my posture, and the unyielding truth standing in his living room. He knew what my parents were capable of, and he knew I was not lying. Instead of handing the paper to Gregory, Jamal folded the fragile document precisely in half and slid it into the inner pocket of his tailored suit jacket. He raised a hand signaling the security guards to stand down. "Nobody touches her." Jamal commanded the authority in his tone, leaving no room for argument. He turned his attention back to Brenda and Gregory, his expression unreadable but intense. "Enjoy the party," he said softly. "I think Chloe and I need to have a private conversation about the tax filings I handled for your shell companies." Jamal looked at me, gesturing toward the front door. "We are leaving," he stated. The silent alliance was formed right there in front of the people who thought they owned the world. As I walked out of the mansion with Jamal trailing behind me, I knew the real war had just begun. My parents had the money and the political leverage, but I had just secured the sharpest legal mind in the city. We drove in separate cars to a 24-hour diner on the industrial edge of the city. The neon sign outside buzzed, casting a harsh green glow across the wet pavement. It was a place frequented by night shift workers and long-haul truck drivers, a place where polished socialites and corporate attorneys never set foot. That made it the safest room in Chicago for us to talk. I slid into the cracked vinyl booth opposite Jamal. He did not order coffee. He sat with his back to the wall, his sharp eyes monitoring the entrance. The confident, composed lawyer I saw at the mansion had been replaced by a man radiating quiet, calculated fury. Jamal built his real estate firm by navigating cutthroat negotiations and exposing fraudulent developers. He prided himself on his integrity. He despised the manufactured elitism his wife Lauren constantly craved. Tonight, he discovered his entire marriage was orchestrated by the very parasites he spent his career prosecuting. Jamal reached inside his tailored jacket and produced a thick manila envelope. He placed it on the sticky Formica table, but kept his hand resting over the flap. "Before I show you this," Jamal said, his voice low and steady, "you need to understand the kind of men we are dealing with. My father Desmond is a predator who hides behind philanthropic foundations. Your father Gregory is an opportunist who monetizes other people's tragedies. I always knew Gregory was hiding assets, but I assumed it was standard tax evasion. I never looked deep enough. Tonight, when you dropped that discharge paper on the table, you handed me the cipher." He lifted his hand and pushed the envelope toward me. "Open it," Jamal instructed. My fingers felt numb as I unclasped the metal tie. I pulled out a stack of financial records printed on crisp legal paper. The top sheet was a wire transfer receipt. I scanned the rigid columns of numbers and banking codes. The origin account belonged to a blind trust registered under the Sterling family portfolio. The destination account was Apex Holdings, the same shell company Gregory used to forge the hospital discharge. "Look at the date," Jamal directed, pointing a long finger at the top right corner. My eyes traced the line. November 18th, 8 years ago. The air in my lungs turned to ice. November 18th was the exact day my parents brought Maya home wrapped in that cheap hospital blanket. "Now look at the amount," Jamal said. I moved my gaze down the page. $2 million. The diner faded away. The buzzing neon sign, the smell of stale grease, the clatter of silverware from the kitchen, all dissolved into a deafening static. $2 million. The digits burned into my retinas. Jamal leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. "Desmond did not pay your parents to orchestrate an adoption. He paid them to execute an erasure. Sienna was a liability. Desmond needed the child gone to protect his public image and his empire. Brenda used her authority at the clinic to falsify a death certificate, silencing the mother. But Gregory realized that disposing of the infant gave Desmond all the power. If the child vanished, Gregory had no leverage. Jamal paused, letting the horrific reality settle between us. He needed collateral. Jamal continued. He needed a living, breathing insurance policy. If he handed the baby over to the foster system, Desmond could use his wealth to seal the records permanently. So Gregory brought the child home. He forced you to raise her. By keeping Maya under his roof, Gregory maintained physical control of Desmond Sterling's darkest secret. Your father turned a newborn baby into a biological ransom note. The truth staggered me. It was not a charity case. It was not a tragic story of a drug-addicted mother. It was extortion. My parents sold my youth, my medical scholarship, and my entire future to blackmail a billionaire. While I was working 3 grueling jobs, waking up at 2 a.m. to heat cheap formula, crying from sheer exhaustion, my father was sitting on a $2 million offshore account. They watched me struggle to buy winter boots for a toddler, while they used blood money to launch their lucrative consulting firm. They sacrificed my potential to elevate their own social standing. And then there was Lauren. I looked up at Jamal. The pieces of the family portrait rearranged themselves into a grotesque display of greed. Lauren's semester in Italy, her designer wardrobe, her upscale apartment, all of it was funded by the trauma of a teenage maid and the theft of my future. They bought their way into your circle, I whispered, my voice cracking. Gregory used the extortion money to play the wealthy investor. He positioned Lauren to meet you. Jamal clenched his jaw, a muscle feathering under his skin. Yes. They orchestrated a marriage to solidify their proximity to the Sterling wealth. Lauren might not know the exact details of the blackmail, but she gladly reaped the benefits. She knew you were suffering, and she chose to look away because your misery subsidized her luxury. She is complicit. I stared at the wire transfer. The depth of their sociopathy was paralyzing. They did not just steal my life, they monetized it. They kept Maya close enough to threaten Desmond, but far enough away from their own pristine image by dumping the maternal responsibilities entirely on my teenage shoulders. I am filing for divorce in the morning, Jamal stated, his tone devoid of any hesitation. I refuse to be a pawn in Gregory's blackmail scheme, and I will not share a name with a woman who profits from human trafficking. But we have a much more immediate problem, Chloe. Jamal tapped the financial ledger with his index finger. You humiliated them in front of the city elite. You exposed their forgery. You threatened the Sterling Empire and Gregory's entire livelihood. Men like my father and your father do not retreat when cornered. They retaliate. What can they do? I asked, trying to steady my breathing. I have Sienna. I have the DNA test. I know the truth now. Knowing the truth and proving it in a court of law are 2 different battles, Jamal warned. Gregory knows you left the party with me. He knows his shell company is exposed. He will not wait for you to go to the authorities. He will strike first, and he will hit you where you are most vulnerable. As if on cue, my cell phone vibrated violently against the Formica table. I glanced at the screen. It was an automated alert from my banking application. I swiped the notification open. The bold red text indicated a critical error. My checking account, the one holding the meager savings I painstakingly built over 8 years, was overdrawn. The balance showed 0. Another alert flashed. My secondary savings account was frozen. I stared at the screen, uncomprehending. Jamal, what is this? Jamal took the phone from my hand, inspecting the alerts. His eyes darkened. When you bought your house 3 years ago, did Gregory co-sign the loan? Yes, I answered, a fresh wave of panic rising in my chest. My credit history was thin because I spent my early 20s raising Maya. He insisted on co-signing to secure a better interest rate. He forced me to open a joint account at his preferred bank to manage the mortgage payments. Jamal shoved the phone back across the table. He is weaponizing your finances. As a joint account holder, he has the legal authority to drain the funds and freeze the assets. He is cutting off your oxygen, Chloe. He wants you destitute, desperate, and incapable of fighting back. A third email notification appeared on my screen. It was a formal digital notice from a property management law firm. Gregory had initiated an emergency eviction protocol, claiming I had breached the terms of our co-ownership agreement. He is coming for the house, I whispered, gripping the edge of the table. He is coming for everything, Jamal corrected. He wants to force you out onto the street. He expects you to come crawling back begging for access to your own money. When you do, he will demand you hand over Maya and sign a non-disclosure agreement. If you refuse, he will ensure you cannot afford a lawyer, a meal, or a place to sleep. The sheer malice of the tactic was breathtaking. Gregory was not just defending his secret. He was actively trying to starve me into submission. I had an 8-year-old child and a traumatized mother waiting in a cheap motel, and as of 3 minutes ago, I did not have a single dollar to my name. Lauren's name suddenly flashed on my screen, an incoming phone call. Jamal nodded, signaling me to answer. I swiped the green button and raised the phone to my ear, saying nothing. Chloe Lauren's voice hissed through the speaker, stripped of all her usual honeyed grace. Dad just shut down your accounts. The bank will be changing the locks on your house by Friday. You brought this on yourself. I remained silent, letting her reveal their hand. Listen to me, Lauren continued, adopting a chillingly pragmatic tone. Bring the girl back to our parents. Give them Sienna. They will handle the orphanage logistics quietly. Do this and Dad will release your funds. Do not ruin my life because you suddenly decided to play the hero. The threat hung in the air, clear and unforgiving. I looked across the table at Jamal. He pulled a sleek digital recording device from his pocket, sliding it toward me to capture every word spilling from my sister's mouth. The rules of engagement had just changed. They thought stripping me of my finances would make me a victim. They forgot that I had spent the last 8 years surviving on nothing. The red recording light on Jamal's digital device blinked rhythmically on the diner table. I stared at the phone speaker, listening to my sister breathe on the other end of the line. Lauren expected me to break. She expected the teenage girl who surrendered her medical scholarship to surface and beg for mercy. She did not realize that 8 years of scraping by on minimum wage had burned the submission right out of me. "Are you saying Dad took my money, Lauren?" I asked, keeping my tone flat and devoid of any emotional inflection. "He is protecting the family." Chloe. Lauren scoffed, her voice dripping with arrogant condescension. "You forced his hand. Just bring the child to the house. Mom has a contact at the state orphanage. They will process her quietly. No police, no scandal. Once the girl is gone, Dad will unlock your checking account. He will even let you keep your little house." I needed the explicit threat recorded clearly. I leaned closer to the microphone. "So if I do not give you Maya, I lose my home and my savings. You lose everything," Lauren replied, taking a sip of what sounded like a cocktail. "Do not be stupid. She is not even yours. Stop ruining my life for a stray." I tapped the red button ending the call. Jamal immediately reached over and stopped the recording. He saved the digital audio file and uploaded a secured copy to his encrypted cloud server. He looked at me, his sharp features illuminated by the harsh diner lighting. "That is felony extortion," Jamal stated, his voice carrying the weight of a seasoned prosecutor. "She just offered a clear quid pro quo. Your financial survival in exchange for an illicit human transaction." I looked down at my hands. The banking alert still glowed on my phone screen. $0. I thought back to the day I bought my small house 3 years ago. I had worked myself to the bone, saving every spare dollar from my jobs. When I went to the bank, the loan officer told me my credit history was too thin because I had spent my early 20s raising a child instead of building a financial portfolio. Gregory stepped in, playing the benevolent father. He offered to co-sign the loan to secure a lower interest rate. He brought his own lawyer to the closing table. He slipped his name onto the deed as a joint tenant. I thought he was finally showing me an ounce of parental support. Instead, he was installing a leash. He filed an emergency partition action and a financial freeze, Jamal explained, reading the legal notice on my phone. He claimed financial discrepancies and mismanagement of joint assets. Because his name is on the deed and the anchor account, the bank complied automatically. He moved fast, Chloe. He initiated this the moment I demanded the Apex Holdings tax ledgers earlier tonight. Gregory knows I am digging into his shell companies. He panicked and went for your jugular to force a surrender before I could uncover the truth. I slid my phone into my pocket. My parents wanted me destitute and terrified. They wanted me to look at my 8-year-old daughter and see a liability I could no longer afford to feed. They expected the fear of poverty to override my maternal instinct. I thanked Jamal for the audio file and stood up from the vinyl booth. We agreed to communicate only through encrypted messaging applications. Jamal needed to return to the mansion to maintain his cover and gather more financial documents from Lauren's home office. I needed to get back to the motel. The drive through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago felt different this time. I was no longer fleeing. I was calculating. I thought about the small house Gregory was trying to steal from me. I thought about the pale yellow walls I painted myself, the height chart marked in pencil on the kitchen doorframe, the small backyard where I taught Maya how to ride a bicycle. My parents viewed that house as leverage. I viewed it as a casualty of war. I accepted the loss the moment I pulled into the parking lot of the cash-only motel. I walked up the exterior concrete stairs and tapped a specific rhythm on the metal door of room 204. The deadbolt slid back a second later. Sienna pulled the door open, her eyes wide and bloodshot. She had the chain lock engaged until she verified it was me. I stepped inside, shutting the cold wind out. The room smelled of cheap bleach and old cigarette smoke. Maya was sound asleep on the far side of the stiff mattress, clutching her stuffed bear. Her breathing was soft and rhythmic, completely unaware of the billionaires and politicians hunting her. Sienna paced the worn carpet, her arms wrapped tightly around her torso. "What happened?" she whispered. "Did you talk to the police?" "We cannot use the local police," I replied, taking off my damp cardigan. "My father has judges and precinct captains in his pocket. He just froze every bank account I own. He initiated an emergency eviction on my home. As of an hour ago, I have $0 and nowhere to live." Sienna stopped pacing. Her shoulders slumped, and the little color left in her face vanished. She looked at the sleeping child, then back at me. Tears welled in her eyes. "You have to give us up," Sienna said, her voice breaking. "You have to hand me over to Desmond Sterling. If you do not, they will destroy you. You cannot fight men who own the city. Please, Chloe, just take Maya and walk away. I will turn myself in." I closed the distance between us and grabbed Sienna by the shoulders. I forced her to look me in the eye. I spent 2 years working as a paralegal assistant for a ruthless defense attorney just to pay off Maya's pediatric bills. I told her, keeping my voice low but intense. I spent thousands of hours organizing discovery files, analyzing financial fraud cases, and learning exactly how criminals hide their tracks. I know how paper trails work, Sienna. I know that men like Desmond and Gregory rely on intimidation because their actual documentation is full of holes. I let go of her shoulders and pointed toward the sleeping girl. I am not giving her back. I am not trading her life for a bank account. We are not going to fight a custody battle in a rigged family court. We are going to build a federal human trafficking case, and we are going to dismantle their entire empire. Sienna wiped a tear from her cheek, staring at me with a mixture of disbelief and desperate hope. "How?" "They erased all the evidence. Brenda faked the death certificate." I shook my head. Brenda faked the final output, but she could not erase the raw input. Think about your time at the hospital, Sienna. When Desmond's fixers brought you to that clinic, Brenda put you in a private VIP recovery suite. She handled your paperwork personally. But a hospital is a massive bureaucracy. Brenda had to requisition the anesthesia she used to knock you out. She had to log the narcotic usage in the pharmacy database. The nurses had to take physical footprint records when Maya was delivered before Brenda intercepted them. Sienna's eyes widened as the realization hit her. The archive. Yes, the archive, I confirmed. Even if Brenda shredded the official birth certificate, the raw intake data, the drug logs, and the unedited shift reports from that specific night must still exist in the hospital's deep storage. That facility keeps physical backups for a decade to comply with state medical board regulations. Sienna swallowed hard, her hands shaking. Brenda retired from that hospital 2 years ago, but she still has friends on the administrative board. If Brenda realizes I am talking to you, she will call in a favor. She will order those archives incinerated by morning. I looked at the glowing red numbers on the cheap motel alarm clock. It was nearly 1 a.m. The city was asleep, but the machinery of my parents' corruption was already turning. Brenda and Gregory knew I left the party with Jamal. They knew the extortion phone call failed to break me. They would move to destroy the remaining evidence before the sun came up. "We do not have until morning," I said, grabbing my car keys from the dresser. Sienna looked terrified. You want to break into a major medical facility tonight? I do not want to, I corrected, stepping toward the door. We have to. Brenda used that hospital to fake a death and traffic a child. The proof is sitting in the basement. I looked down at Maya. She shifted in her sleep, her small hand gripping the bear tighter. I pulled the blankets up over her shoulders, ensuring she was warm. I turned back to Sienna. My parents took my college degree. They took my youth. Tonight, they took my money and my home. They have nothing left to threaten me with. I opened the motel room door, feeling the icy Chicago wind hit my face. The fear that had dictated my life for 8 years was gone entirely. It had been replaced by a cold mechanical resolve. We needed to infiltrate the records department of one of the most secure medical buildings in the district. We needed to steal the ghost of a child my mother tried to bury. The red recording light on Jamal's digital device blinked rhythmically on the diner table. I stared at the phone speaker, listening to my sister breathe on the other end of the line. Lauren expected me to break. She expected the teenage girl who surrendered her medical scholarship to surface and beg for mercy. She did not realize that 8 years of scraping by on minimum wage had burned the submission right out of me. Are you saying Dad took my money, Lauren? I asked, keeping my tone flat and devoid of any emotional inflection. He is protecting the family. Chloe. Lauren scoffed, her voice dripping with arrogant condescension. You forced his hand. Just bring the child to the house. Mom has a contact at the state orphanage. They will process her quietly. No police, no scandal. Once the girl is gone, Dad will unlock your checking account. He will even let you keep your little house. I needed the explicit threat recorded clearly. I leaned closer to the microphone. So if I do not give you Maya, I lose my home and my savings. You lose everything, Lauren replied, taking a sip of what sounded like a cocktail. Do not be stupid. She is not even yours. Stop ruining my life for a stray. I tapped the red button, ending the call. Jamal immediately reached over and stopped the recording. He saved the digital audio file and uploaded a secured copy to his encrypted cloud server. He looked at me, his sharp features illuminated by the harsh diner lighting. That is felony extortion, Jamal stated, his voice carrying the weight of a seasoned prosecutor. She just offered a clear quid pro quo. Your financial survival in exchange for an illicit human transaction. I looked down at my hands. The banking alert still glowed on my phone screen. $0. I thought back to the day I bought my small house 3 years ago. I had worked myself to the bone, saving every spare dollar from my jobs. When I went to the bank, the loan officer told me my credit history was too thin because I had spent my early 20s raising a child instead of building a financial portfolio. Gregory stepped in, playing the benevolent father. He offered to co-sign the loan to secure a lower interest rate. He brought his own lawyer to the closing table. He slipped his name onto the deed as a joint tenant. I thought he was finally showing me an ounce of parental support. Instead, he was installing a leash. He filed an emergency partition action and a financial freeze, Jamal explained, reading the legal notice on my phone. He claimed financial discrepancies and mismanagement of joint assets. Because his name is on the deed and the anchor account, the bank complied automatically. He moved fast, Chloe. He initiated this the moment I demanded the Apex Holdings tax ledgers earlier tonight. Gregory knows I am digging into his shell companies. He panicked and went for your jugular to force a surrender before I could uncover the truth. I slid my phone into my pocket. My parents wanted me destitute and terrified. They wanted me to look at my 8-year-old daughter and see a liability I could no longer afford to feed. They expected the fear of poverty to override my maternal instinct. I thanked Jamal for the audio file and stood up from the vinyl booth. We agreed to communicate only through encrypted messaging applications. Jamal needed to return to the mansion to maintain his cover and gather more financial documents from Lauren's home office. I needed to get back to the motel. The drive through the rain-slicked streets of Chicago felt different this time. I was no longer fleeing. I was calculating. I thought about the small house Gregory was trying to steal from me. I thought about the pale yellow walls I painted myself, the height chart marked in pencil on the kitchen door frame, the small backyard where I taught Maya how to ride a bicycle. My parents viewed that house as leverage. I viewed it as a casualty of war. I accepted the loss the moment I pulled into the parking lot of the cash-only motel. I called Elena from the motel parking lot. Elena was a seasoned diner waitress who worked the brutal morning shifts with me for 5 years. She arrived 10 minutes later carrying a heavy iron wrench. I handed her $20 and asked her to lock herself inside room 204. I instructed her to keep the deadbolt secured and let no one pass the threshold while Maya slept. Elena did not ask questions. She simply nodded and took her post. Sienna rode in the passenger seat, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. We navigated the dark streets toward the sprawling medical complex that served the greater Chicago district. This was the same towering facility where my mother Brenda ruled the administrative wing for over a decade. I parked my rusted sedan 2 blocks away, hiding the vehicle in a narrow alley behind a commercial bakery. We walked the remaining distance, sticking to the shadows of the brick buildings. The freezing wind bit through my thin clothes, but the adrenaline kept my focus razor sharp. Elias waited near the underground logistics bay. I tutored his youngest son for the college entrance exams years ago when Elias could not afford extra help. He owed me a favor. He handed me a generic maintenance keycard without making eye contact. He warned me the sub-basement archives were patrolled by night shift security guards every 40 minutes. The clock was ticking. The air in the subterranean level tasted metallic and stale. Fluorescent tubes flickered overhead, casting long, erratic shadows across the concrete corridor. I swiped the keycard against the electronic reader. The heavy steel door clicked open, granting us access to the hospital deep storage. Cavernous rows of high-density mobile shelving filled the massive room. The mechanical steering wheels on the aisles required serious physical exertion to turn. Sienna and I scanned the index codes posted on the ends of each shelf. We bypassed decades of surgical records and financial audits until we located the section dedicated to the maternal wards and unassigned admissions. I calculated the exact month and year. November, 8 years ago. I found the designated cardboard storage box on a top shelf. I pulled it down, setting it onto a nearby metal utility cart. Dust coated my fingers as I sifted through dozens of thick patient files. My hands stopped moving. I pulled out a thick manila folder labeled Jane Doe, Restricted Access, authorized by B. Harrison. I opened the folder, spreading the documents across the metal cart under the harsh overhead light. The first page was a pharmacy requisition log. My mother signed a direct order for an alarming combination of midazolam and fentanyl. These were powerful amnesic sedatives. The dosage listed on the paper was staggering for a postpartum teenager. I turned to the next page. It was a standard relinquishment of parental rights form. Sienna's name was printed in the designated box. Below it, the signature block contained a jagged, erratic scrawl. The ink dragged heavily, tearing the paper in 2 places. The pen pressure showed zero cognitive control. Sienna touched the edge of the document, her breathing shallow. She remembered the cold, sterile room. She remembered Brenda entering with a syringe, telling her it was a mandatory painkiller. She remembered the room spinning violently before a pen was forced into her hand. Brenda physically guided a drugged teenage girl to sign away her child. The true horror emerged on the 3rd page. I unclipped the infant mortality report. The document listed umbilical cord asphyxiation as the cause of death. I checked the timestamps printed at the bottom margins of both pages. The death report was generated and officially signed 4 hours after the parental relinquishment form was notarized. The sequence of paperwork defied all medical and legal protocols. Why would an administrator force a mother to sign away her parental rights to a baby that was already declared dead? The contradiction proved the crime. Brenda drugged Sienna, forced a legal surrender, then faked a mortality report to hide a living, breathing child from the state registry. This was irrefutable evidence of medical kidnapping and chemical coercion. My mother orchestrated a black market transaction under the guise of hospital procedure. I needed high-resolution scans. Physical papers could be easily snatched from my hands or destroyed. I moved to the lone computer terminal sitting on a cluttered desk in the corner of the room. I used Elias's login credentials to access the legacy database. I typed the specific patient identification number listed on the physical folder into the search bar. I needed the digital timestamps to match the printed pages to build an airtight federal case. I hit the print command, sending the files to the local machine tray. The progress bar reached 50%. Then the monitor froze. The standard blue interface shifted to a stark, flashing yellow warning screen. A system dialog box appeared in the center of the monitor. Unauthorized access. File flagged by Executive Administration. Security protocol engaged. Brenda did not just retire. She left digital tripwires on her most dangerous secrets. Accessing Sienna's specific medical identification number triggered a silent audit alert directly to the hospital security mainframe. The overhead lights switched instantly to emergency red. A piercing automated siren echoed through the concrete hallways, shaking the dust from the ceiling. We had overstayed our window. Heavy boots pounded down the stairwell just outside the archive room. Security personnel were descending rapidly. I shoved the original physical documents deep into my jacket pocket. I grabbed the printed digital logs straight from the tray, folding them roughly. I yanked Sienna by the arm, pulling her away from the desk. We ran in the opposite direction of the approaching footsteps. We navigated the maze of towering mechanical shelving units, using the narrow aisles for cover. Beams from heavy-duty flashlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across the metal racks just yards behind us. Walkie-talkies crackled with frantic voices, coordinating a perimeter lockdown. We reached the secondary fire exit at the far end of the basement. I slammed my shoulder against the heavy crash bar. The metal door gave way. We sprinted up the concrete stairs, our lungs burning with every frantic breath. The siren masked the sound of our escape as we burst out into the freezing Chicago night, exiting through a side alley adjacent to the loading dock. The cold air hit us like a physical wall. We kept running, sticking to the narrow spaces between the brick buildings to avoid the illumination of the main street. I guided Sienna through the twisting alleys, retracing our steps back to the commercial bakery where I parked the sedan. We rounded the final corner. My car sat exactly where I left it, tucked away under a broken street lamp, but the vehicle was leaning sharply to the left. I slowed my pace, my instincts screaming a silent warning. I approached the sedan cautiously, keeping Sienna behind me. The rubber on all four tires was shredded to the metal rims. Deep, jagged gashes tore through the reinforced sidewalls. This was not a random act of street vandalism. Someone used a heavy, serrated blade to systematically disable the vehicle in a matter of minutes. I stepped closer to the driver's side door. A single, sleek, black business card was tucked under the windshield wiper. I pulled it free, holding it up to the faint moonlight. The card held no name and no phone number. It simply displayed the gold-embossed crest of Desmond Sterling's real estate conglomerate. Brenda did not just alert hospital security when the tripwire triggered. She alerted the fixers. The Billionaire's men were already on the ground. They tracked us to the hidden alley. They disabled our escape route and waited just long enough to leave a signature. They were sending a message. This was no longer a legal dispute over custody or a financial blackmail scheme. My parents and their powerful allies were operating outside the law. They were prepared to eliminate witnesses to protect their empire. We were standing in an empty alley with disabled transportation holding evidence that could send a billionaire to federal prison. We were being hunted. The sight of Desmond Sterling's gold-embossed crest under my windshield wiper sent a cold electric shock straight to my core. I shoved the sleek business card into my pocket. The shredded tires on my sedan rendered the vehicle completely useless. We were stranded in an alley miles away from the motel where Maya slept. I grabbed Sienna's arm and pulled her deeper into the shadows away from the main road. The fixers who slashed my tires could still be watching from an unmarked car nearby. We needed immediate transport. I could not risk using a ride-sharing application tied to my name or credit card, since Gregory likely had access to my digital footprint through the frozen bank accounts. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number for a local cash-only taxi dispatch. I memorized the digits during my days working 3 jobs when public transit failed me in the early hours of the morning. A beaten-up yellow cab arrived 10 agonizing minutes later. I handed the driver the last $20 bill I had in my pocket and gave him an address 2 blocks away from the motel. Sienna and I sat in silence in the back seat, watching the slick Chicago streets blur past the rain-splattered windows. The stolen hospital documents burned like hot coals against my chest. When we finally reached the motel, I knocked out the specific rhythm on the door of room 204. Elena pulled the deadbolt back instantly. She stepped aside, allowing us entry. The heavy iron wrench still rested on the dresser beside her. Maya was exactly where I left her, fast asleep, breathing softly under the thin blankets. I thanked Elena, pressing my hand to her shoulder. She nodded, gathered her coat, and slipped out into the night, asking no questions. I locked the door, setting the security chain. I slumped into the cheap wooden chair by the window, exhaling a jagged breath. We had the evidence. We survived the hospital archive, but the victory felt brittle. Desmond Sterling's fixers knew my license plate. Gregory knew I was hunting the truth. The counterattack was coming, and I knew it would be ruthless. The retaliation arrived the very next morning, not with thugs breaking down the door, but with a process server holding a stack of legal documents. I stepped out of the motel room briefly to grab ice from the vending machine in the courtyard. A man in a cheap suit approached me holding a thick manila envelope. He confirmed my name, handed me the package, and walked away without another word. I tore the seal open, standing in the freezing morning air. The heading on the first page read, "Emergency ex parte motion for temporary custody and protective order, filed in the family court of Cook County." The petitioners were Brenda and Gregory. The respondent was me. I scanned the dense legal text, my vision blurring with fury. My parents did not just file for custody. They launched a scorched earth character assassination. The motion claimed I was suffering from severe paranoid schizophrenia. It alleged I had kidnapped my adoptive daughter, Maya, and was keeping her in squalid, dangerous conditions. The filing included a sworn affidavit from a licensed psychiatrist named Dr. Vance. The affidavit stated that I was a danger to myself and the minor child, detailing fabricated instances of erratic behavior and violent outbursts. I read the doctor's name again. Vance. The realization hit me hard. Dr. Vance was the private therapist Brenda hired for Lauren when my sister claimed she suffered from anxiety regarding her college workload. The man was on my parents' payroll. They bought a medical professional to draft a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation, diagnosing me with severe mental illness without ever having treated me. The document went further. It specifically requested a permanent restraining order, barring Sienna, the delusional vagrant, from coming within 500 feet of Maya. My parents anticipated my move to reunite the biological mother and child. They used the court system to legally block Sienna from ever reclaiming her daughter. But the most terrifying detail was printed at the bottom of the second page. A hearing was scheduled before a family court judge in exactly 48 hours. If I failed to appear, or if I lost the hearing, Maya would be immediately remanded into Gregory's custody. If Gregory regained physical control of Maya, the child would disappear. She was the living, breathing evidence of the Sterling family's extortion scheme. With Desmond's fixers already tracking me, I knew Maya would not just be put into an orphanage. She would be taken out of the country, or worse, eliminated entirely to protect the billionaire's empire. I walked back into the motel room, locking the door behind me. I laid the legal documents on the small circular table. Sienna read over my shoulder, her face draining of color. "They are going to take her," Sienna whispered, her voice shaking. "They are going to use a judge to steal her legally this time." "I need a lawyer," I said, pulling out my phone. "A ruthless one, someone who is not afraid to litigate against deep pockets." I spent the next 6 hours calling every prominent family law attorney in Chicago. I used a burner phone Sienna bought from the corner bodega, using the spare change in her coat pocket. I described the forged hospital documents, the extortion, and the fraudulent psychiatric affidavit. Every single conversation followed the same frustrating trajectory. The lawyers would listen intently until I mentioned the names involved. Gregory's real estate connections made them hesitant. But the moment I uttered the name Desmond Sterling, the line went cold. The attorneys either cited sudden conflicts of interest or demanded an exorbitant retainer fee up front, knowing my accounts were frozen. The legal community in Chicago knew better than to cross the Sterling family. Desmond held immense influence over judicial campaigns and corporate contracts. No local attorney was willing to commit career suicide for a penniless woman living in a motel. By mid-afternoon, I had exhausted my list. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at the blank screen of the burner phone. The feeling of absolute powerlessness threatened to consume me. My parents had systematically dismantled my resources. They took my money, my home, my transportation, and my credibility. They weaponized the legal system to label me insane, ensuring no reputable lawyer would touch my case. 48 hours. In 2 days, I would walk into a courtroom facing an army of high-priced litigators representing a billionaire and a pair of master manipulators. I had stolen hospital records, but a judge presented with a psychiatric evaluation declaring me schizophrenic would likely dismiss the papers as the fabrications of a diseased mind. I looked at Maya sitting on the floor meticulously drawing a picture of a house with a green crayon. She looked up at me, offering a bright, innocent smile. She had no idea that her very existence was the center of a corrupt conspiracy. She just knew I kept her safe. I promised to protect her when they placed her in my arms 8 years ago. I surrendered my medical scholarship to fulfill that promise. I was not going to break it now. I picked up the burner phone and dialed the only encrypted number I had saved. The line rang 3 times before it connected. "I need your help, Jamal," I stated, my voice stripped of pride and desperation, leaving only raw resolve. Gregory filed an ex parte motion. He bought a psychiatrist to declare me insane. "We have a custody hearing in 48 hours. No lawyer in the city will touch the case because of your father's name." Jamal remained silent for a heavy moment. I could hear the faint sound of city traffic through the receiver. "Where are you, Chloe?" Jamal asked, his tone sharp and focused. I gave him the address of the cash-only motel. "I will be there in 20 minutes, Jamal replied. "Do not open the door for anyone else." I hung up the phone. Jamal was a corporate attorney specializing in real estate and financial fraud. He was not a family law litigator, but he possessed something far more valuable than courtroom experience. He possessed the inside knowledge of the Sterling Empire and an intimate understanding of Gregory's corruption. He was the only man in Chicago equipped to untangle the financial web funding my parents' legal assault. 20 minutes later, a knock echoed on the motel room door. I verified Jamal through the peephole before sliding the deadbolt back. He stepped inside wearing a dark tailored suit completely out of place against the peeling wallpaper and stained carpet. He carried a heavy leather briefcase. He glanced at Sienna standing nervously in the corner, then looked down at Maya coloring on the floor. His expression softened slightly, acknowledging the child whose existence shattered his marriage. He turned his attention back to me, his demeanor shifting into sheer professional intensity. Jamal set his briefcase on the circular table and popped the brass latches. "We are not going to fight a custody battle in a rigged family court, Chloe," he declared, pulling out thick stacks of financial ledgers. "We are going to turn this custody hearing into a federal indictment." Jamal spread the financial ledgers across the small circular table in the motel room. His presence dominated the cramped space, radiating an intense, focused energy. He was no longer just the wealthy brother-in-law enduring awkward family dinners. He was a high-powered corporate litigator preparing for a devastating counteroffensive. I reviewed the documents Gregory submitted for the emergency custody hearing. Jamal began pointing to a highlighted section on his tablet. "The psychiatric affidavit from Dr. Vance is the cornerstone of their strategy. They need the court to establish you as mentally unfit to justify seizing Maya immediately. It is a classic move. Discredit the witness before the witness can present evidence." I crossed my arms, leaning against the cheap veneer dresser. "No lawyer in the city will take my case because your father is backing Gregory. If a judge sees a sworn statement from a licensed medical professional calling me schizophrenic, my hospital records will be dismissed as paranoid delusions. How do we fight a rigged medical evaluation?" Jamal offered a grim, satisfied smile. "We do not fight the evaluation. We destroy the evaluator." He pulled a fresh folder from his leather briefcase and slid it toward me. I opened it, finding a series of heavily redacted banking statements and property deeds. Dr. Vance operates a high-end private practice in the Gold Coast district, Jamal explained, tracing a finger over a specific transaction line. He caters to wealthy clients who pay exorbitant fees for discretion. But 2 years ago, Vance made several catastrophic investments in commercial real estate. He over-leveraged himself to the brink of bankruptcy. I scanned the numbers, realizing the sheer magnitude of the debt. The figures extended into the millions. Gregory bailed him out. I deduced, tracing the connection. Jamal nodded. Gregory used one of his shell companies, the same one involved in the hospital forgery, to quietly purchase Vance's defaulting commercial mortgages. Gregory currently holds the primary lien on the doctor's entire practice. If Vance disobeys Gregory, he loses his license, his practice, and his livelihood. The psychiatric affidavit is not a medical opinion. It is a coerced debt payment. The revelation settled over me like a heavy weight. My parents did not just buy a diagnosis. They blackmailed a desperate man into committing perjury to steal my child. The layers of their corruption seemed bottomless. Every interaction, every seemingly legitimate document was built on a foundation of extortion. We can present this financial conflict of interest to the family court judge, I suggested, feeling a surge of genuine hope. If we prove Vance is compromised, the psychiatric evaluation gets thrown out. The custody motion collapses. Jamal shook his head, dismissing the idea entirely. You are thinking too small, Chloe. We are not walking into a family court to play defense. Family court proceedings are sealed. The records are confidential. If we defeat the custody motion, Gregory will simply devise another method to take Maya. He has endless resources and Desmond Sterling protecting him. We cannot win a war of attrition. Jamal tapped his knuckles against the table, his gaze intensifying. We are going to bypass the state courts completely. We are taking this straight to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Sienna gasped from the corner of the room, clutching her trench coat tightly. The FBI. Will they even listen to us? They will listen to the evidence I am preparing. Jamal stated, his voice carrying absolute certainty. Blackmailing a doctor across state lines, forging medical records using shell companies to obscure financial trails, and extorting a billionaire using a kidnapped infant. These are federal crimes: wire fraud, interstate extortion, human trafficking. We are handing the FBI a ready-made racketeering case. I looked at the meticulously organized files on the table. Jamal was orchestrating a legal massacre. He was not just trying to protect Maya, he was dismantling his own family's empire. Why are you doing this, Jamal? I asked, needing to understand his motivation. You are Desmond Sterling's son. You are exposing your own father to federal prosecution. You stand to lose your inheritance, your political backing, and your social standing. Why burn your own house down? Jamal met my gaze, his expression devoid of hesitation. Because I refuse to inherit an empire built on human suffering. I spent my career prosecuting corrupt developers while ignoring the rot inside my own family. Lauren convinced me Gregory was just a shrewd businessman. I chose to believe her because it was comfortable. But knowing that my wife funds her luxury by participating in the concealment of an abducted child crosses a line I cannot ignore. He reached into his briefcase and produced one final document. It was a formal legal petition bearing the header of the Cook County Circuit Court. I filed for divorce this morning, Jamal announced, his tone cold and definitive. The petition cites irreconcilable differences, but my attorneys have already drafted a secondary filing detailing Lauren's complicity in the extortion scheme. She will receive the service papers before the day ends. The Sterling family name will not protect her. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal would shatter my parents. Lauren, the golden child, their ultimate achievement, was being discarded by the very man they sacrificed my future to secure. The irony was poetic and devastating. They traded my life to elevate Lauren, and now Lauren was being dragged down by the very corruption they used to prop her up. Jamal checked his watch, standing up from the table. We have 48 hours until the custody hearing. Gregory expects you to show up unrepresented, terrified, and unprepared. He expects the judge to hand him temporary custody based on the fraudulent psychiatric report. I nodded, understanding the strategy forming in his mind. We are going to let him believe he is winning. Exactly. Jamal confirmed. "We use the family court hearing as a distraction. While Gregory's lawyers are arguing over temporary guardianship in a state courtroom, my federal contacts will be presenting this entire dossier to a U.S. attorney at the Dirksen Federal Building. By the time the family court judge rules on the custody motion, the FBI will be drafting arrest warrants." He packed his briefcase, securing the brass latches with a sharp click. "But we need one more piece of evidence to make the federal case impenetrable. The financial ledgers prove the extortion. The hospital records prove the forgery. But we need undeniable proof linking Desmond Sterling directly to Sienna. We need to prove the child was the catalyst for the entire conspiracy." I pulled the folded DNA test from my pocket, setting it on the table. "We have the genetic link between Sienna and Maya," I stated. "But that does not legally bind Desmond to the extortion. He will claim Sienna is a random woman trying to scam him. He will use his high-priced lawyers to dismiss the DNA test as circumstantial." Jamal leaned against the doorframe, a dark, calculated look crossing his features. "Desmond is arrogant. He believes his wealth makes him untouchable. He relies on intimidation because he expects people to break under pressure. We are going to apply a pressure he has never experienced. We are going to make him panic. And when arrogant men panic, they make fatal mistakes. How do we make a billionaire panic?" Sienna asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and newfound resolve. "We attack his legacy," Jamal answered. "Desmond cares about his public image more than anything else. He spends millions maintaining the facade of a philanthropic patriarch. If he believes that image is about to be shattered publicly, he will scramble to contain the damage. He will act recklessly to secure the child." Jamal looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "You said Desmond's fixers slashed your tires last night. They know you are hunting the truth. They know you hold the hospital documents. Desmond will not wait for the custody hearing to resolve. He wants the physical evidence destroyed, and he wants the child secured before any judge can examine the case. He will try to buy your silence." I gripped the edge of the table, bracing myself for the dangerous reality of his plan. "You want me to negotiate with the man who ordered the kidnapping of my daughter. I want you to bait a trap," Jamal corrected. "Desmond will reach out to you directly. He will offer you a life-changing sum of money to hand over the documents and relinquish Maya. He will present it as a generous settlement to avoid a messy legal battle. And if I refuse, I asked knowing the alternative involved the fixers waiting in the shadows. If you refuse, he will ensure you face the full force of the fabricated criminal charges," Jamal stated grimly. "He will guarantee you rot in a state penitentiary for kidnapping while Maya disappears into his custody. But you are not going to refuse Chloe. You are going to pretend to accept his offer." The plan was incredibly risky. Negotiating with a ruthless billionaire required walking a razor-thin line between deception and disaster. If Desmond suspected a trap, he would deploy his security team to eliminate the threat entirely. I would be walking directly into the lion's den, armed only with the element of surprise. I looked at Maya, sleeping peacefully on the worn motel bed. She was the innocent center of a grotesque criminal conspiracy. My parents stole my youth to hide her. Desmond Sterling orchestrated a kidnapping to erase her. I promised to protect her, and I was ready to risk my freedom to ensure she never became a pawn again. "I will do it," I told Jamal, my voice unwavering. "Tell me exactly how we coordinate the trap." Jamal pulled a secondary burner phone from his pocket, setting it on the table. "Keep this phone active. Desmond will use an encrypted channel to contact you within the next 24 hours. Play the desperate, terrified mother. Demand a physical meeting to exchange the documents. Make him believe you are broken by the financial freeze and the impending custody battle." We spent the next 2 hours meticulously reviewing the federal statutes governing wire fraud and extortion. We synchronized our timelines, ensuring the FBI task force would receive the dossier exactly as the family court hearing commenced. Jamal detailed the specific legal terminology I needed to use during the negotiation with Desmond to trigger undeniable federal jurisdiction. Every word, every action was calculated to build an inescapable legal cage. As Jamal prepared to leave the motel, the first rays of dawn began to creep through the narrow gap in the blinds. The city of Chicago was waking up completely unaware of the massive empire about to collapse within its borders. My parents believed they had successfully isolated me. They believed freezing my bank accounts and forging a psychiatric evaluation would force me into submission. They thought they were playing a game of intimidation against a defenseless single mother. They did not realize they had just triggered a federal racketeering investigation. They did not know that the son-in-law they coveted had turned his legal expertise into a weapon aimed directly at their destruction. The trap was set. The bait was ready. The countdown to the courtroom massacre had officially begun. The 48 hours leading up to the family court hearing felt like navigating a high wire over an active volcano. Sienna remained securely locked inside the motel room with Maya. Jamal operated in the shadows, coordinating the federal submission. I walked into the Cook County Courthouse alone, wearing a simple tailored blazer, channeling every ounce of cold detachment I possessed. The courtroom was sterile, smelling of floor wax and stale tension. My parents sat at the petitioner's table, flanking a high-powered attorney whose suit likely cost more than my first car. Lauren sat in the gallery, her posture rigid, her eyes darting nervously toward the entrance. She had received Jamal's divorce papers the previous evening. The golden child was currently watching her pristine marriage dissolve into a public scandal. Gregory offered me a brief, condescending smirk as I took my seat at the respondents' table unrepresented. He truly believed he had orchestrated a flawless victory. He thought he cornered a desperate, terrified girl. The Honorable Judge Martinez presided, a stern woman with silver hair who tolerated zero theatrics in her courtroom. Your Honor, Gregory's attorney began, his voice booming with practiced theatricality. We are here today to rescue a minor child from a profoundly dangerous environment. The respondent, Chloe, suffers from severe paranoid schizophrenia, as detailed in the sworn psychiatric affidavit provided by Dr. Vance. She has alienated herself from her supportive family and is currently harboring the child in squalid conditions. We respectfully request immediate temporary custody be granted to my clients to ensure the child's physical and psychological safety. The attorney painted a tragic portrait of a troubled young woman incapable of distinguishing reality from delusion. He utilized every manipulative buzzword in the legal dictionary: unstable, erratic, unfit. My mother dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief, performing the role of the heartbroken matriarch to perfection. Judge Martinez reviewed the thick file, adjusting her glasses. She looked down at me from the bench, her expression guarded. Ms. Chloe, you appear today without counsel. Do you understand the severity of the allegations presented in this affidavit? Do you have a response? I stood slowly, keeping my hands resting flat on the heavy oak table. I did not tremble. I did not cry. I understand the allegations perfectly. Your Honor. I stated, my voice carrying a lethal calm that echoed through the quiet courtroom. However, I am not here to defend my mental health against a fabricated diagnosis. I am here to report a felony extortion scheme executed by the petitioners. Gregory's attorney immediately shot to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. The respondent is exhibiting the exact paranoid delusions outlined in the psychiatric report. This is a custody hearing, not a criminal tribunal. I ignored the objection, retrieving a small digital audio player and a thick manila envelope from my leather tote bag. Dr. Vance did not evaluate me. Your Honor? I continued, projecting my voice over the attorney's protests. Dr. Vance is heavily leveraged in commercial real estate debt. The primary lien holder on his practice is a shell company owned by my father, Gregory. The psychiatric affidavit is a coerced document provided as a debt payment. Judge Martinez raised an eyebrow, the bored indifference vanishing from her face. She struck her gavel, silencing Gregory's attorney. Ms. Chloe, those are severe accusations. You cannot make claims of judicial fraud without substantial evidence. I stepped out from behind the respondent's table and approached the bench. I placed the manila envelope directly in front of the judge. Inside that envelope, Your Honor, are the tax ledgers for Apex Holdings, LLC, identifying Gregory as the primary stakeholder. I stated clearly. You will also find the commercial mortgage assignments linking Apex Holdings directly to Dr. Vance's private practice. Gregory's smug expression evaporated instantly. He gripped the edge of his table, the color draining from his face. Lauren gasped from the gallery, her hands flying to her mouth. But the fraudulent affidavit is merely the mechanism of their extortion, I pressed forward, setting the digital audio player next to the envelope. The motive is financial blackmail. 3 days ago, my sister Lauren contacted me demanding I surrender my daughter to an unauthorized state facility. If I complied, my father would unlock my frozen bank accounts and halt an illegal eviction. I pressed the play button on the audio device. The crisp digital recording of Lauren's voice filled the courtroom. "Just bring the child to the house," Lauren's recorded voice hissed. "Mom has a contact at the state orphanage. Once the girl is gone, Dad will unlock your checking account. He will even let you keep your little house." The recording ended, leaving a stunned silence in its wake. Judge Martinez stared at the audio player, her jaw setting into a hard, rigid line. She looked from the device to Lauren, who was visibly shrinking into the wooden gallery bench, trying to become invisible. "Your Honor." Gregory's attorney stammered, struggling to recover his composure. "This audio is unverified. It is inadmissible. This is an orchestrated ambush. I need a witness to verify the authenticity of these financial documents and the context of the extortion." Judge Martinez declared, her eyes locked on Gregory. The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. Jamal Sterling walked down the center aisle. His presence was commanding, radiating absolute authority. He bypassed the gallery, ignoring his estranged wife entirely, and approached the bench, standing shoulder to shoulder with me. "State your name for the record," Judge Martinez ordered. "Jamal Sterling, Your Honor," he replied, his deep voice echoing in the vast room. "I am a licensed corporate attorney in the state of Illinois. I prepared the tax extensions for Apex Holdings 3 years ago. I can confirm under oath that the financial documents presented are authentic. I can also confirm that the voice on the audio recording belongs to my estranged wife, Lauren." Brenda let out a sharp, strangled sound. Her perfect family facade shattered publicly. The golden son-in-law, the man she sacrificed my future to secure, was currently dismantling her husband's defense under penalty of perjury. Jamal turned slightly, addressing the courtroom. "Furthermore, Your Honor, the petitioners possess a forged hospital discharge document notarized by that very same defunct shell company. They used a fabricated death certificate to bypass the state adoption registry 8 years ago, hiding the identity of the biological mother." Judge Martinez leaned back in her high leather chair, rubbing her temples. She surveyed the room, absorbing the sheer magnitude of the corruption exposed before her. The custody hearing had morphed into a preliminary criminal tribunal. Based on the evidence of severe financial conflict of interest and potential extortion, Judge Martinez announced, her voice booming with judicial fury, "I am striking the psychiatric affidavit from the record. This ex parte motion for temporary custody is denied with prejudice." Gregory's attorney collapsed into his chair, defeated. Brenda buried her face in her hands, sobbing genuine tears of terror. Judge Martinez pointed her gavel directly at my father. "I am forwarding this entire docket, the audio recording and the financial ledgers, to the state attorney's office for immediate review regarding perjury, judicial fraud, and extortion. You are not leaving this courthouse with a child today. You will be lucky if you do not leave in handcuffs by the end of the week. Court is adjourned." The sharp crack of the gavel finalized the massacre. We won the battle. We secured Maya's safety from the immediate legal threat. As the courtroom began to clear, Gregory stood up from his table. He did not look defeated. He did not look terrified. He adjusted his tailored suit jacket and walked slowly toward me, his eyes burning with a chilling, unhinged arrogance. "You think a few printed papers and a state judge can take me down?" Chloe Gregory whispered, his tone venomous. "You think exposing a shell company matters. You have no idea what you just unleashed." I met his gaze, refusing to back down. "The state attorney has the extortion recording, Gregory. You are finished." Gregory let out a harsh, humorless laugh. "The state attorney is a politician, Chloe, and politicians require funding. You think Desmond Sterling will allow a low-level family court judge to expose his empire? He owns the people who employ that judge." He leaned closer, his breath smelling of stale coffee and mints. "You won a minor skirmish today, but the man backing me will crush you. He will bury you so deep no federal agent will ever find the paperwork. Enjoy your fleeting victory. It is the last one you will ever have." Gregory turned and walked out of the courtroom, leaving a toxic chill in his wake. He was not making an empty threat. He knew the federal task force was building a case, but he also knew Desmond Sterling's vast wealth could stall, obliterate, or corrupt a federal investigation before warrants were ever issued. I looked at Jamal. His expression remained grim, validating my fears. "My father is already moving," Jamal stated quietly, ensuring no lingering court staff could hear us. The moment the judge denied the custody motion, Desmond's fixers activated their contingency plan. State-level corruption is easy for him to squash. He will use his political action committees to silence the state attorney. My phone vibrated in my pocket. The burner device Jamal provided. I pulled it out, checking the encrypted messaging application. A single text message glowed on the screen, sent from an untraceable routing number. The message was brief, clinical, and utterly terrifying. "We have the motel, $5 million cash and global immunity for the child. Meet at the Waldorf Astoria tonight. Come alone or the girl disappears before midnight." My blood ran cold. Desmond Sterling did not care about the courtroom theatrics. He bypassed the legal system entirely. His security team had located the cash-only motel where Sienna and Maya were hiding. The billionaire was stepping out of the shadows to handle the extortion himself. The final confrontation was no longer a legal abstraction. It was a hostage negotiation. The ride from the courthouse to the cash-only motel felt like descending into a nightmare. Jamal drove his sleek sedan well over the speed limit, weaving through the sluggish Chicago traffic. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the passenger door handle. Desmond Sterling did not waste time licking his wounds after a legal defeat. He bypassed the entire judicial system and escalated the conflict into a direct hostage situation. We swerved into the cracked asphalt parking lot of the motel. The rain had intensified, washing away the grime of the city, but doing nothing to cleanse the dread pooling in my stomach. 3 unmarked black SUVs were parked in a tight diagonal formation blocking the exit routes. The engines idled purring with a low mechanical menace. Men in dark tactical raincoats stood near the stairwell, their postures rigid, their hands resting near their waistbands. Jamal parked near the perimeter. He reached into the glove compartment and retrieved a heavy steel flashlight, gripping it tightly. We moved through the downpour, ignoring the cold rain soaking through our clothes. The men in the raincoats stepped aside, offering no physical resistance as we approached the concrete stairs. They did not need to fight us outside. They already controlled the high ground. I sprinted up to the second floor and kicked open the door to room 204. The deadbolt had been professionally dismantled, the brass lock shattered and hanging off the wooden frame. Inside the cramped motel room, the air was thick with tension. Elena, my former diner colleague, sat bound to a wooden chair in the corner, a dark bruise swelling along her jawline. She caught my eye, offering a fierce, defiant glare despite her restraints. Sienna was backed against the far wall, shielding Maya with her body. The 8-year-old girl buried her face in Sienna's trench coat, trembling visibly. Standing in the center of the stained carpet was a tall man wearing a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than the entire motel building. His silver hair was cropped close to his scalp, and his eyes held the dead clinical focus of a predator. He was the apex fixer, the man billionaires called when problems needed to vanish permanently. "You must be Chloe, the fixer," said his voice smooth and devoid of any regional accent. "My employer Desmond sends his regards. He also sends a solution to this unfortunate misunderstanding." Jamal stepped past me, raising the heavy steel flashlight. "You are trespassing on a rented property and holding civilians against their will. If you do not vacate this room, I will ensure you spend the next decade in a federal penitentiary." The fixer did not flinch. He merely glanced at Jamal, offering a thin, patronizing smile. "You are far out of your depth, counselor. Your federal task force is currently experiencing bureaucratic delays. Warrants take time to process. Extradition requires paperwork. We operate on a much faster timeline." He unlatched a heavy titanium briefcase resting on the motel bed and flipped the lid open. Neatly stacked bundles of crisp $100 bills filled the interior alongside a series of pristine legal documents. $5 million, the fixer announced, gesturing to the briefcase's contents. Tax-free, untraceable offshore routing numbers are provided in the attached dossier. The sheer volume of wealth displayed on the cheap motel bed felt obscene. I stared at the money, feeling the bile rise in my throat. "You think you can buy a human being?" I hissed, stepping toward him. "We are not buying anyone," the fixer corrected, adjusting his cuffs. "We are funding a prestigious educational opportunity. The child will be transported to a highly exclusive boarding school in Geneva. She will receive the best education money can buy. She will adopt a new name, a new identity, and a new future." Desmond is an exceedingly generous man when his privacy is respected. He pulled a thick contract from the briefcase. Sienna signs this non-disclosure agreement, transferring all remaining biological claims to an anonymous holding trust. You sign this confidentiality waiver. You take the $5 million and you walk away. Everyone wins. I looked at Sienna. Her eyes were wide with terror. Geneva. They wanted to send Maya across the Atlantic Ocean, burying her in a foreign institution under a fabricated identity. She would effectively cease to exist. Desmond was paying $5 million to erase a child, and if we refuse, I asked, locking eyes with the fixer. The man sighed, reaching into the interior pocket of his suit jacket. He withdrew a secondary manila folder, tossing it onto the circular table. "If you refuse, we submit this to the Federal Bureau of Investigation." He explained, his tone turning lethal. "It contains fabricated flight manifests, encrypted emails, and a manufactured digital trail proving you and Sienna orchestrated an interstate kidnapping for ransom. We have witnesses ready to testify that you demanded $10 million from Gregory to return his legally adopted daughter." He tapped the folder with a manicured finger. "You will be arrested before dawn. You will face decades in a federal prison. Sienna will be deported or incarcerated, and the child will be remanded into state custody where my employer will quietly retrieve her anyway. You cannot outmaneuver endless capital Chloe. You can either be rich or you can be a prisoner." The trap was flawlessly constructed. Desmond Sterling possessed the financial firepower to manipulate the truth until it fit his narrative. He could buy witnesses, forge digital footprints, and control the legal outcome. I was standing in a cheap motel room, stripped of my resources, facing a man who could erase my freedom with a single phone call. Before I could formulate a response, the bathroom door opened. A figure stepped out into the dim light of the motel room. Lauren. My sister wore a designer trench coat over her pristine silk dress, holding a luxury handbag tight against her chest. Her face was pale, her makeup slightly smudged, indicating recent tears. She looked at Jamal first, her expression a mixture of profound regret and desperate anger. Then she turned her gaze to me. "Chloe." "Please," Lauren begged, her voice cracking. "Just take the money." I stared at her, feeling a wave of pure disgust. "You are standing with the men who threatened to frame me for kidnapping. You are helping them traffic an 8-year-old girl overseas. I am trying to save our family." Lauren cried out, tears spilling over her eyelashes. "Jamal filed for divorce. The media is circling. If this scandal breaks, the Sterling Empire will crush us. Dad will go to prison. Mom will lose everything. My entire life will be ruined. Desmond promised me a generous settlement and a seat on his foundation board if I can convince you to sign the papers." She took a step toward me, reaching out with a trembling hand. "You have $5 million sitting right in front of you, Chloe. You can go back to school. You can buy a real house. You can start over. Do not play the martyr. The girl is not yours. Just let her go so the rest of us can survive." Lauren's pathetic plea laid bare the ultimate tragedy of her existence. She was so terrified of losing her social status, she was willing to facilitate the exile of an innocent child. She valued her foundation board seat more than my freedom. I looked at Jamal. His jaw was clenched tight, his eyes burning with silent fury as he watched his estranged wife broker a human trafficking deal to save her alimony. He gave me a microscopic nod. It was a silent communication between us. We could not fight our way out of this room. If we refused the offer, Desmond's men would simply execute the frame-up and seize Maya by force. We needed a diversion. We needed to stall the exchange until the federal authorities were ready to strike. I let my shoulders slump, adopting the posture of a defeated, broken woman. I looked at the titanium briefcase, then at the fraudulent kidnapping dossier. I forced my breathing to become shallow, mimicking a panic attack. "I cannot go to prison," I whispered, letting a tremor enter my voice. "I will not survive a federal sentence." Sienna gasped, reaching out to grab my arm. "Chloe, no! You promised me." I shook Sienna off, acting desperate and greedy. $5 million, I muttered, staring at the cash. "It is enough to disappear. It is enough to start over." Lauren let out a ragged sigh of relief. "Yes, Chloe. It is the smart choice. You are making the right decision." The fixer smiled a cold, victorious expression. "Excellent." He slid the non-disclosure agreements across the table, offering me an expensive fountain pen. "Sign the waivers. We will transfer the child to the waiting vehicles immediately." I looked at the pen, then pushed it back across the table. I shook my head, projecting a fierce, paranoid energy. "I am not signing anything in a motel room surrounded by armed guards," I stated, my voice rising in manufactured hysteria. "The moment I put my name on that paper, you could shoot me and claim it was self-defense. You could take the money back and leave me bleeding on this cheap carpet." "I am not stupid." The fixer narrowed his eyes, his patience fraying. "You are in no position to negotiate terms. I am the only one holding the original hospital archive records I countered, lying effortlessly. The documents I pulled from the basement are hidden in a secure location. You need those destroyed to guarantee Desmond's safety. If anything happens to me tonight, those documents trigger an automatic release to the press." The lie hit its mark. The fixer hesitated, recognizing the risk of uncontained physical evidence leaking to the media. "What do you want?" the fixer demanded, his tone losing its smooth polish. "I want a public venue," I declared, stepping away from the briefcase. "I want hundreds of witnesses around me when I hand over the hospital documents and sign your waivers. I want guarantees that your men cannot touch me once the transaction is complete." Lauren scoffed, crossing her arms. "You want us to rent a ballroom for a blackmail exchange? You are insane. I do not need you to rent anything," I replied, fixing my gaze on my sister. "Tomorrow night, Mom and Dad are hosting their lavish 30th wedding anniversary gala at the Waldorf Astoria. The entire city elite will be there, including Desmond Sterling and his political allies. It is a highly secure, highly public environment." I turned back to the fixer, leaning over the table. "I will bring the original archive documents to the Waldorf Astoria tomorrow night. We will meet in a private VIP room adjacent to the main ballroom. I will sign the non-disclosure agreements and hand over the evidence. In exchange, you hand over the $5 million. Once the funds are secured, Maya leaves with you out the service entrance." The fixer studied my face, searching for signs of deception. He saw only a terrified woman attempting to secure a safe, lucrative exit. The logic appealed to his corporate mindset. A public gala offered mutual destruction if either side deviated from the plan. It was the perfect neutral ground for a high-stakes exchange. "Agreed," the fixer stated, snapping the titanium briefcase shut. "Tomorrow night at the Waldorf Astoria. Arrive at 8 o'clock. Bring the child and the documents. If you attempt to contact law enforcement before the exchange, the kidnapping dossier goes to the federal prosecutor immediately." He gestured to the armed men in the hallway. "We are leaving." Lauren offered me a final fleeting look of relief before scurrying out the door, trailing behind Desmond's men. The heavy footsteps faded down the concrete stairs, leaving the motel room in a suffocating silence. I rushed to Elena, untying the thick ropes binding her to the wooden chair. She rubbed her bruised jaw, offering a weak smile. "I told you I would not let them pass the threshold," she whispered. "I had to let them knock me out to prove it." I hugged her tightly, thanking her for her bravery. Jamal secured the shattered door, placing a heavy dresser against the frame. Sienna sank to the floor, pulling Maya into her lap, weeping openly. "You are going to give her to them?" Sienna sobbed, burying her face in Maya's hair. "You are going to sell my baby to that monster." I knelt beside Sienna, placing my hands gently on her trembling shoulders. I forced her to look at me. The fearful, defeated facade I projected for the fixer vanished entirely, leaving only a cold, terrifying resolve. "I am not selling anyone, Sienna," I promised, my voice dropping to a fierce whisper. "Desmond Sterling thinks he bought our silence. He thinks tomorrow night is a simple financial transaction." I looked up at Jamal, who was already dialing a number on his encrypted burner phone. He does not realize I continued feeling a dangerous smile form on my lips, that tomorrow night is an execution. We are going to the Waldorf Astoria to burn his empire to the ground. The Waldorf Astoria commanded the Chicago skyline like a monument to old money and untouchable privilege. Its gilded revolving doors admitted a steady stream of the city elite, arriving for Brenda and Gregory's 30th anniversary gala. The evening was a meticulously curated performance designed to showcase my parents' enduring love and formidable social standing. Dozens of photographers clustered near the entrance, snapping pictures of aldermen judges and real estate tycoons. The air smelled of expensive perfume and the crisp, undeniable scent of absolute power. I bypassed the red carpet, entering through a discreet side door intended for hotel staff. I wore a simple black dress, a stark contrast to the shimmering gowns filling the grand ballroom. Sienna walked close behind me, her face pale, gripping Maya's small hand. We were escorted by two of Jamal's trusted private security contractors, who ensured we reached the designated VIP suite without interception. The suite was located on the mezzanine level, featuring a heavy soundproof door and a massive one-way glass window overlooking the opulent ballroom below. I could see my parents standing on the main stage, bathed in flattering spotlight. Gregory held a crystal champagne flute, his arm wrapped affectionately around Brenda's waist. They smiled, radiating manufactured warmth, completely oblivious to the explosive charge primed directly above them. The heavy mahogany door to the VIP suite clicked shut. Desmond Sterling sat behind a sprawling mahogany conference table, his posture exuding a terrifying, relaxed confidence. The billionaire wore a bespoke tuxedo, his silver hair catching the dim overhead lighting. Standing to his right was his apex fixer, the same man from the motel room holding the titanium briefcase. To Desmond's left stood Lauren, her arms crossed defensively over her designer gown, her eyes darting nervously between me and the briefcase. A sharply dressed corporate lawyer completed their ranks, standing ready to finalize the transaction. "You cut it close." Chloe Desmond observed his deep voice devoid of any warmth. "Punctuality is a virtue you should cultivate, considering the generous arrangement we are providing." I stepped forward, keeping Maya tucked safely behind Sienna near the heavy wooden door. "I am here, Desmond. The documents are here. Let us finish this." The corporate attorney slid a thick stack of legal contracts across the polished wood table. The documents included the non-disclosure agreements, the custody relinquishment forms, and the confidentiality waivers binding Sienna and me to permanent silence. "Sign the papers," Chloe the attorney instructed, tapping an expensive fountain pen against the margin. "Once your signature is verified, the funds will be transferred to the offshore account provided. The child leaves with our security personnel immediately." Lauren stepped forward, her face twisting into a mocking, triumphant smile. She believed the nightmare was over. She believed her pristine life was secured. "I knew you would break." Lauren sneered, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. "You played the righteous martyr for 8 years, pretending you were better than all of us. But in the end, you are just like everyone else. You have a price. $5 million is a lot of money for a girl who spent her 20s scrubbing diner tables. Go ahead, Chloe. Sign the paper. Take the money and crawl back to whatever miserable life you came from." I looked down at the contracts. The crisp white pages represented my surrender. They symbolized the ultimate victory of corruption over innocence. Desmond watched me, his eyes gleaming with the arrogant certainty of a man who believed every human soul possessed a price tag. I picked up the heavy fountain pen, rolling the cold metal between my fingers. I let the silence stretch, building the anticipation in the room. I looked at Desmond, then at Lauren, then finally at the pen in my hand. I smiled. a cold, sharp expression that caused Lauren's triumphant sneer to falter slightly. "You think I spent 8 years raising a child, sacrificing my medical degree, and working 3 minimum wage jobs just to sell her for $5 million? I asked, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. "You think I walked into the Waldorf Astoria tonight to accept a bribe?" Desmond's relaxed posture shifted. He sat forward, resting his hands flat on the table, his eyes narrowing. "Sign the papers, Chloe. Do not test my patience." I tossed the fountain pen onto the table. It clattered loudly against the wood, rolling off the edge and landing on the plush carpet. "I am not signing anything," I stated, locking eyes with the billionaire. "I did not come here to negotiate, Desmond. I came here to execute." I reached into the pocket of my black dress and retrieved my smartphone. I did not pull out the hospital archive documents they expected. I held the device up, ensuring they could clearly see the screen. "What are you doing?" the fixer demanded, stepping forward, his hand hovering near his suit jacket. I tapped a single icon on the screen. It was not a recording application. It was a remote transmission trigger linked directly to Jamal's encrypted cloud server. "I am forwarding the evidence," I replied, my thumb hovering over the final confirmation button. Lauren lunged across the table, a look of sheer panic distorting her features. "No, stop her." I pressed the button. The digital transmission indicator flashed green, confirming the upload was complete. "You stupid girl," Desmond snarled, slamming his fist against the table. "The FBI will not process those files for weeks. I will have my legal team bury that evidence before a single warrant is drafted. You just forfeited your money and your freedom. My fixers will take the child and hand you over to the police for kidnapping." I shook my head, maintaining my cold composure. "I did not send the files to the FBI, Desmond. Jamal already delivered the federal dossier this morning. The transmission I just triggered was not for the authorities." I pointed toward the one-way glass window overlooking the grand ballroom. I sent it to the audiovisual control booth downstairs. Desmond's eyes widened in sudden, horrifying realization. He spun around in his chair, staring through the glass down at the crowded gala below. Gregory was mid-speech on the main stage, raising his glass to toast Brenda. The massive digital projection screen behind them, intended to display a montage of their 30-year marriage, flickered ominously. The romantic music cut out abruptly, replaced by a harsh static crackle. The screen illuminated brilliantly, projecting a massive high-definition image of the $2 million wire transfer from the Sterling Blind Trust to Apex Holdings. The murmurs in the ballroom ceased instantly. Hundreds of guests, including the press and prominent political figures, stared at the undeniable proof of a massive financial transaction. Before Gregory could react, the image shifted. The screen now displayed the forged hospital discharge paper featuring Brenda's signature alongside the fake death certificate. A collective gasp echoed up to the VIP suite. The elite crowd was witnessing a real-time public exposure of medical fraud and human trafficking. Desmond lunged toward the door, but it was too late. The final piece of evidence echoed through the ballroom's massive surround sound system. The crisp digital recording of Brenda's voice played at maximum volume. "Lock your doors, Chloe. Get Maya away from her. Do not listen to a word she says. She is a dangerous woman trying to extort us." The audio continued, playing Lauren's subsequent extortion threat. "Just bring the child to the house. Mom has a contact at the state orphanage. Once the girl is gone, Dad will unlock your checking account." Pandemonium erupted in the ballroom below. Reporters scrambled for their cameras, shouting questions at the stage. Gregory dropped his champagne flute, the crystal shattering against the floor. Brenda stood frozen, her face contorted in absolute terror as her pristine reputation disintegrated before hundreds of witnesses. In the VIP suite, the corporate attorneys scrambled, backing away from the table, recognizing the catastrophic legal implication of being present. Lauren collapsed into a chair, burying her face in her hands, sobbing hysterically as the reality of her ruined life crashed down upon her. Desmond Sterling, the untouchable billionaire, stared through the glass, his face purple with rage. "You destroyed everything," he roared, turning back to face me, his hands balling into fists. "I will crush you. I will prove that child has nothing to do with my family. I will ruin you." He was frantic, desperate to sever his connection to the scandal erupting downstairs. He believed denying paternity would somehow mitigate the extortion charges. He thought he could still control the narrative. He had no idea that the final crushing blow had yet to be delivered. The audio recording echoing through the grand ballroom below was a spectacular detonation of the facade my parents spent decades building. Brenda's voice, cold and calculating, admitting to the extortion plot, played on a relentless loop over the surround sound system. The high-definition projection of the $2 million wire transfer loomed over the stage, a damning visual testament to their greed. Down on the floor, the scene devolved into sheer chaos. The polished elite of Chicago, the aldermen, the judges, the socialites, recoiled from the stage as if my parents suddenly carried a lethal contagion. Reporters who attended the gala, expecting a dull society piece, scrambled forward, thrusting recording devices toward the podium. Gregory stood paralyzed, the shattered remains of his champagne flute glittering at his feet. Brenda clutched the podium, her knuckles white, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish, unable to articulate a single defense. In the VIP suite above, Desmond Sterling watched his carefully constructed firewall disintegrate. The untouchable billionaire pivoted away from the glass window, his face contorted in a mask of apoplectic rage. He abandoned his refined, composed persona, entirely revealing the vicious predator beneath. "Shut it down!" Desmond roared, spittle flying from his lips. He rounded on his fixer, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "Get down to that control booth and rip the cables out of the wall. Kill the power to the entire floor." The fixer reached inside his suit jacket, his hand resting heavily on a concealed weapon. He moved toward the heavy mahogany door, a lethal urgency in his stride. Before his hand could grasp the brass handle, the door blasted open with staggering force. Federal agents in tactical gear flooded the VIP suite. The room suddenly shrank, overwhelmed by Kevlar and matte black weaponry. FBI. "Drop the weapon and put your hands where I can see them," the lead agent shouted, aiming his sidearm directly at the fixer's chest. The fixer, a man trained to calculate odds in a fraction of a second, assessed the situation. He was surrounded. He slowly raised his hands, interlocking his fingers behind his head, stepping away from his concealed firearm. Two agents moved in swiftly, disarming him and kicking his legs apart to secure the handcuffs. Desmond staggered back, hitting the edge of the conference table. The billionaire's eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for an exit, a loophole, a way to buy his way out of the immediate disaster. He looked at the corporate attorney cowering in the corner. "Call the governor." Desmond demanded, his voice cracking with panic. "Get my legal team on the phone. This is an illegal raid. I want these agents stripped of their badges by morning." The lead agent, a tall man with a calm, clinical demeanor, stepped forward, presenting a thick stack of folded papers. He did not yell. He did not need to. He held the power. "Desmond Sterling," the agent stated, "you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, interstate extortion, and witness tampering." Desmond sneered, slapping the papers out of the agent's hand. "You have nothing. That audio recording downstairs proves Gregory blackmailed me. I am a victim of extortion. I paid that money under duress to protect my family from a baseless smear campaign. You cannot build a federal case on a frantic payout." The corporate attorney, finding a shred of courage, stepped forward to defend his client. "My client is correct, Agent. The evidence currently humiliating Gregory downstairs only proves my client transferred funds. It does not prove my client orchestrated the kidnapping or falsified medical records. You are overreaching." I stood by the window watching Desmond attempt to rewrite history in real time. He was a master manipulator trying to pivot the narrative, casting himself as the tragic victim of my parents' greed. He believed the $5 million contract sitting on the table, the very contract I refused to sign, was his ultimate shield. He thought the transaction failed, protecting him from further implication. I stepped forward, the satisfying click of my heels cutting through the tense atmosphere. "You did not pay my parents to protect yourself from a smear campaign, Desmond," I said, my voice steady and unwavering. "You paid them to erase a child you fathered with an underage maid. You paid them to secure your legacy." Desmond barked a harsh, derisive laugh, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You delusional little girl." He turned to the federal agents, his tone dripping with arrogant confidence. This woman is unhinged. She is trying to connect me to a random child using a forged hospital record. I have never seen that woman, Sienna, in my life. I will submit to a paternity test right now. I will prove to the entire world that I have zero genetic connection to that girl. You have no proof of any underlying crime." Lauren, still sobbing in her chair, looked up, her mascara running in dark streaks down her face. She clung to Desmond's defense, a drowning woman grasping at a razor blade. "He is telling the truth," Chloe Lauren pleaded, her voice shrill. "Desmond would never jeopardize his empire for a maid. You set us up for nothing." Desmond straightened his tuxedo jacket, regaining a fraction of his formidable composure. He looked at the federal agent, a smug, victorious smile creeping onto his lips. "You heard my attorney. I was extorted. Arrest Gregory and let me walk out of here. Or I guarantee my legal team will dismantle your career by Friday." He truly believed he had won. He believed denying paternity would sever his connection to the core crime. He assumed Brenda fabricated the entire pregnancy narrative to extort him, leveraging his reputation against a phantom child. He thought the DNA test Sienna held was a bluff. He had no idea that I held the final devastating piece of evidence. He did not know that the trap I set was not designed to catch him in a lie. It was designed to expose a truth so grotesque it would shatter his reality completely. The federal agent did not back down. He simply looked at me, offering a slight nod. I reached into the inner pocket of my black dress. I did not pull out another digital trigger. I pulled out the original physical DNA test, the fragile piece of paper Sienna handed me on the night she knocked on my door. I walked toward the mahogany table, stopping directly in front of the billionaire. The air in the room grew thick, suffocatingly heavy with anticipation. "You are absolutely right, Desmond," I stated, sliding the DNA test across the polished wood. "You should demand a paternity test. You should shout it from the rooftops. Because you are not Maya's father." Desmond frowned, looking down at the paper. His smug expression faltered, replaced by a deep, unsettling confusion. He glanced at his corporate attorney, who leaned in to read the results. "If I am not the father," Desmond began, his voice trailing off. I did not let him finish. I delivered the crushing blow, letting the words strike with the force of a physical impact. "You paid my parents $2 million to erase your illegitimate child, Desmond," and explained, my tone icy and precise. But my mother, Brenda, is a very pragmatic woman. She realized that holding your actual child was too dangerous. If you ever demanded a paternity test, the extortion scheme would hold. But she also knew you were terrified of the scandal. Lauren stopped crying, her eyes widening in horror as the realization began to dawn on her. "Brenda did not fake the death of your child, Desmond," I continued. "Your child actually died during delivery. The umbilical cord asphyxiation was real. The silence in the VIP suite was absolute." Desmond stared at me, his jaw slack, his arrogant facade crumbling into dust. "If my child died," Desmond whispered, his voice hollow, "who is the girl? Who did I pay $2 million to hide?" I looked at Lauren, watching the golden child realize the entire foundation of her existence was built on an unimaginable depravity. Then I turned my gaze back to the billionaire. I tapped the DNA test resting on the table. "Read the genetic markers, Desmond," I commanded. Desmond's eyes dropped to the paper. His attorney read the lines aloud, his voice shaking uncontrollably as he processed the scientific data. "Probability of paternity," the attorney read, swallowing hard. 99.9%. Desmond looked up, his eyes frantic. "I do not understand. Whose DNA is this?" I leaned forward, resting my hands on the table, ensuring he heard every single syllable of his ultimate defeat. "The child is not yours, Desmond," I said softly, delivering the payload. "The child belongs to my father, Gregory." The declaration hung in the air of the VIP suite, a leaden weight dragging the remaining oxygen from the room. Desmond Sterling, the untouchable billionaire who built an empire on ruthless calculation, stared blankly at the DNA test resting on the mahogany table. His formidable intellect struggled to process the sheer audacity of the deception. He had paid $2 million to bury a scandal. He spent 8 years believing he successfully erased his illegitimate child. Now standing under the harsh fluorescent lights of federal agents, he realized he had funded his own extortion over a ghost. "My father," I repeated, ensuring the horrific reality settled deep into Desmond's bones. "Gregory assaulted Sienna. When my mother Brenda discovered the teenage maid was pregnant by her own husband, she did not file for divorce. She recognized a lucrative opportunity. She knew you had also assaulted Sienna Desmond. She knew you were terrified of the liability." Lauren let out a sharp, guttural cry, clapping her hands over her ears, as if she could physically block the truth from entering her mind. The pristine narrative of her perfect upbringing shattered around her. Her entire life, the European vacations, the designer clothes, the luxury apartment, was subsidized by her father's sexual predation and her mother's sociopathic greed. When your actual child died during delivery, Brenda needed a replacement to secure the extortion payout, I explained, keeping my tone clinical and detached. So she used her husband's illegitimate child. She forged the paperwork, faked the death certificate to silence Sienna, and presented Maya to you as your own flesh and blood. You paid $2 million to hide Gregory's crime, Desmond. You financed his real estate firm. You inadvertently bought your son Jamal a father-in-law who is a rapist. Desmond's face flushed a deep, mottled purple. The veins in his neck strained against his starched collar. The realization that he had been outmaneuvered by a mid-level real estate opportunist and a hospital administrator broke the dam of his composure. He lunged across the table toward me, his hands hooked into claws, but 2 federal agents intercepted him instantly, slamming him face first into the polished wood. "You lying witch!" Desmond roared, thrashing against the agent's grip. They played me. They played me for 8 years. He turned his head, straining to look at his corporate attorney, who was currently shrinking into the corner of the room, desperately trying to distance himself from the radioactive fallout. "Destroy them!" Desmond commanded, his voice hoarse and feral. "Call every lawyer on retainer. I want Gregory crushed. I want Brenda bankrupt. I want them obliterated." The lead FBI agent secured handcuffs around Desmond's wrists, yanking him upright. "You can strategize with your legal team from a federal holding cell." "Mr. Sterling," the agent stated, devoid of any sympathy. "Conspiracy to commit extortion is still a federal offense regardless of whether you were the target or the participant. You engaged in a financial transaction to cover up a felony." As the agents hauled the screaming billionaire toward the door, I turned my attention back to the grand ballroom below. The audiovisual control booth operator hired by Jamal had executed the final phase of the public exposure perfectly. The projection screen on the main stage shifted from the $2 million bank statement to a live feed from the VIP suite. The audio feed activated, broadcasting the entire confrontation across the massive surround sound system. Hundreds of elite guests, the politicians, the investors, the socialites stood frozen in the ballroom, staring up at the giant screen. They had just witnessed Desmond Sterling, a pillar of the Chicago business community, violently restrained by federal agents while his complicity in a human trafficking cover-up was laid bare. But the true devastation unfolded on the main stage. Gregory stood paralyzed beside the shattered remains of his champagne flute. The live broadcast of my revelation echoed through the cavernous room. The realization that his darkest secret, his assault on Sienna, and the true parentage of Maya was now public knowledge struck him with the force of a physical blow. He looked out at the sea of horrified faces, his political allies stepping back, his business partners turning away in disgust. Brenda, standing inches away from him, turned slowly. The elegant, poised matriarch vanished, replaced by a woman consumed by a vicious, feral rage. She knew about Gregory's assault. She orchestrated the cover-up to protect their wealth. But she never expected the truth to be broadcast to her entire social circle. She never anticipated the profound public humiliation of being exposed as the wife of a predator and the architect of a fraudulent extortion scheme. "You stupid, arrogant man!" Brenda shrieked, her voice cracking over the microphone left on the podium. She lunged at Gregory, her manicured hands transforming into claws. She raked her nails across his face, tearing a deep, bloody gash down his cheek. Gregory staggered backward, raising his arms defensively, but Brenda was relentless. She struck him repeatedly, screaming incoherent curses, a lifetime of suppressed resentment and toxic complicity erupting violently on stage. Security personnel rushed the platform, struggling to pull Brenda off her bleeding husband. The ballroom devolved into utter chaos. Guests scrambled toward the exits, desperate to escape the imploding scandal. Reporters shoved their way forward, flashes strobing incessantly, capturing the literal and metaphorical destruction of the family empire. Up in the VIP suite, Lauren watched the live feed of her parents' vicious brawl, her eyes wide and vacant. The golden child, the beneficiary of their ruthless extortion, sat entirely alone. Her husband Jamal had orchestrated the raid. Her father-in-law was in handcuffs. Her parents were bleeding on a stage surrounded by police. The luxury, the status, the unearned privilege evaporated, leaving nothing but the horrific truth of her complicity. I walked over to the chair where Lauren sat paralyzed. I looked down at my older sister, feeling no triumph, no satisfaction, and no pity. She had chosen her path. She had offered to sell an 8-year-old girl to protect her designer wardrobe. She had laughed while my parents drained my bank accounts. "I hope the country club membership was worth it, Lauren," I said, my voice quiet and steady. She did not answer. She simply stared at the screen, watching our mother being dragged off the stage in handcuffs, screaming her husband's name like a curse. I turned away from Lauren and walked toward the heavy mahogany door. The federal agents had cleared the room, leaving only the echoes of a demolished dynasty. I stepped out into the quiet, carpeted hallway of the mezzanine level, leaving the wreckage of my family behind me. Jamal was waiting near the elevators. He stood tall, his posture relaxed, the heavy burden of his father's corruption finally lifted from his shoulders. He held a thick manila envelope containing the finalized divorce papers and the sworn witness statements securing my custody of Maya. "It is done," Jamal said, handing me the envelope. "The state attorney is drafting the indictments. Gregory and Brenda are facing multiple federal charges, including kidnapping, extortion, and medical fraud. Desmond will fight the charges, but the wire transfer records are airtight. The empire is finished." I took the envelope, holding it tightly against my chest. "Thank you, Jamal. I could not have dismantled them without your access." Jamal shook his head, a small, respectful smile touching his lips. "You are the one who pulled the trigger, Chloe. I just handed you the ammunition." The elevator doors chimed opening to reveal Sienna and Maya waiting inside, accompanied by the private security contractors. Sienna rushed forward, throwing her arms around me, weeping tears of profound, overwhelming relief. Maya peeked out from behind Sienna's trench coat, holding her stuffed bear, her wide brown eyes looking up at me with absolute trust. "Are we going home now?" Maya asked, her voice soft and innocent. I knelt down, wrapping my arms around the little girl who had cost me my youth and saved my soul. I looked at Sienna standing beside us, the biological mother who refused to give up. I thought about the small house with the pale yellow walls and the height chart on the doorframe. The bank accounts were still frozen, but Jamal promised the federal injunction would release the funds within the week. "Yes," I answered, holding Maya close. "We are going home." The elevator doors slid shut, sealing us inside. We descended toward the lobby, leaving the opulent destruction of the Waldorf Astoria behind. The nightmare my parents orchestrated was over. The silence they demanded was broken. I had surrendered my medical scholarship at 17 to raise a hostage, but at 25, I had engineered an execution. I walked out of the hotel and stepped into the cool Chicago night, ready to build a life entirely on my own terms. The aftermath of the Waldorf Astoria Gala unfolded with the brutal efficiency of a demolition. When the foundation of a corrupt empire shatters, the collapse is never quiet. It is loud, messy, and unsparing. The live broadcast of the DNA revelation triggered an immediate cascade of catastrophic legal and financial consequences. The very systems my parents and Desmond Sterling used to oppress others now accelerated their downfall. Desmond Sterling, the billionaire who spent decades buying silence, found himself trapped in a scandal his wealth could not contain. The moment the federal agents escorted him from the VIP suite, his high-priced corporate attorneys initiated a scorched earth defense strategy. Desmond realized the extortion charges would stick due to the indisputable $2 million wire transfer. His only viable option was to pivot, shifting the entire burden of the human trafficking and forgery conspiracy onto Gregory. Desmond's legal team immediately began cooperating with federal prosecutors, offering detailed documentation of Gregory's shell companies and predatory real estate acquisitions in exchange for a reduced sentence regarding the wire fraud. The predator turned informant, sacrificing his co-conspirator to save his own skin. Gregory faced an inescapable legal avalanche. The public exposure of his assault on Sienna, an underage girl, compounded by the subsequent kidnapping and extortion, elevated his crimes to federal offenses. The state attorney, coordinating closely with Jamal's federal contacts, issued a barrage of indictments. Gregory was charged with statutory rape, kidnapping, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit extortion. The authorities froze every asset tied to his name, dismantling his lucrative consulting firm overnight. His political allies vanished, distancing themselves from the radioactive fallout. The man who orchestrated my financial ruin now sat in a federal holding cell, stripped of his wealth, his reputation, and his freedom. Brenda's descent was equally devastating. Her desperate attempt to claw Gregory on the main stage of the Gala resulted in immediate detainment by hotel security, followed swiftly by an arrest. The hospital where she served as head administrator launched a massive internal audit, terrified of federal implication. The audit corroborated the stolen archive documents exposing Brenda's authorization of heavy sedatives to a minor and the subsequent falsification of the infant mortality report. The medical board revoked her administrative credentials permanently. She was indicted for medical fraud, kidnapping, and accessory to extortion. Her carefully cultivated social standing evaporated. The elite friends she spent 30 years impressing refused to take her calls, abandoning her to the relentless scrutiny of the press. The swift incarceration of our parents left Lauren completely isolated. The golden child was suddenly forced to navigate a reality where her unearned privilege had vanished. 2 days after the gala, I received a frantic phone call from an unknown number. I was sitting at the kitchen island of my small house, reviewing the legal paperwork Jamal had finalized, releasing the freeze on my bank accounts. Maya was safely asleep in her bedroom, the nightmares of the past week slowly fading. Sienna sat across from me, nursing a cup of tea, her posture relaxed for the first time since she knocked on my door. I answered the call, keeping the phone away from my ear, recognizing the shrill, desperate tone immediately. "Chloe, please!" Lauren sobbed, the polished arrogance stripped entirely from her voice. "You have to help me. I am locked out of the penthouse. Jamal canceled all the credit cards. He froze the joint accounts. I do not even have money for a hotel." I set the phone on the marble counter, tapping the speaker button. Her tears did not move me. I felt no satisfaction and no pity. I simply observed the inevitable consequence of her choices. Jamal filed for divorce. "Lauren," I stated, my tone flat and clinical. "You signed a prenuptial agreement protecting his assets in the event of marital misconduct. Aiding and abetting a federal extortion scheme qualifies as misconduct. You are legally entitled to nothing. You do not understand." Lauren cried, her voice escalating into a hysterical pitch. "The bank repossessed my car this morning. The country club suspended my membership. Dad's lawyer called and said all the family assets are seized pending the federal trial. I have nowhere to go, Chloe. Please, just let me stay in your spare room for a few days until I can figure this out. You are my sister." I looked at the pale yellow walls of my kitchen. The same walls Gregory threatened to steal from me. The same house Lauren told me to sacrifice along with Maya to protect her luxurious lifestyle. When Dad froze my bank accounts and initiated the eviction notice last week, I reminded Lauren, keeping my voice deadly calm, "I asked you for help. You told me to give Maya to a corrupt orphanage to save your reputation. You told me to stop ruining your life for a stray." "I was scared," Lauren stammered, grasping for any excuse. "I panicked. Mom and Dad manipulated me. I did not know the whole truth. You knew enough, I countered, cutting through her frantic rationalization. You knew I was desperate. You knew Sienna was the biological mother. You stood in that motel room and begged me to sell an 8-year-old child to a predator so you could keep your foundation board seat. You did not panic, Lauren. You made a calculation. You bet on the wrong side and you lost. Please, Chloe. Lauren begged, her sobs echoing through the phone speaker. I have nothing. I am sitting on the sidewalk with a suitcase. I do not even have cab fare. You cannot just abandon me. I leaned closer to the phone, ensuring my final words resonated with absolute clarity. You chose to stand with monsters, Lauren, I said, offering no warmth and no salvation. Now you can drown with them. I tapped the red button, ending the call. I blocked the number and set the phone face down on the counter. The silence in the kitchen felt profound. A heavy, toxic anchor I dragged around for 25 years had finally been severed. Sienna watched me from across the island, taking a slow sip of her tea. She did not ask if I felt guilty. She knew the depth of the betrayal. She knew that setting a boundary against corruption required a ruthless, unyielding resolve. The trial preparation consumed the next several months. Jamal, operating as the lead consultant for the federal prosecution, utilized his intimate knowledge of the Sterling and Gregory empires to dismantle their defense strategies. Desmond's high-priced litigators attempted to secure plea deals to avoid prison time, but the sheer volume of evidence presented an insurmountable obstacle. The forged medical records, the financial ledgers detailing the $2 million transfer, and the clear audio recordings of the extortion demands painted a comprehensive picture of a highly organized criminal syndicate. The most damning testimony came during the preliminary hearings. Sienna took the stand, narrating the horrific events of 8 years ago. She detailed Gregory's assault, Brenda's chemical coercion at the clinic, and the devastating moment she was handed a fake death certificate. Her testimony, delivered with raw, undeniable pain, humanized the cold financial documents breaking through the defense's attempts to characterize the ordeal as a simple misunderstanding. I took the stand the following week. I did not focus on my lost medical scholarship or the years of grueling minimum wage labor. I focused entirely on the mechanics of the extortion. I detailed how Brenda and Gregory used my empathy to secure a free, silent caretaker. I explained the precise timeline of the $2 million wire transfer, aligning perfectly with the day they brought Maya to our suburban home. I authenticated the audio recordings of Brenda and Lauren, confirming their active participation in the conspiracy to conceal the child. Gregory and Brenda sat at the defense table, their heads bowed, unable to meet my gaze. The facade of the perfect, affluent family was entirely dismantled. They were exposed as ruthless predators who monetized tragedy and sold their own daughter's future to purchase social elevation. When the prosecution rested its case, the defense scrambled, offering weak counter-narratives, attempting to shift blame to Desmond Sterling's fixers. But the documentary evidence was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 8 hours before returning a verdict. Gregory was found guilty on all counts, including statutory rape, kidnapping, wire fraud, and extortion. The judge, a stern federal appointee who tolerated zero corruption, handed down a sentence of 25 years in a maximum security facility without the possibility of early parole. Brenda was found guilty of medical fraud, kidnapping, and accessory to extortion. The judge, considering her active role in drugging a minor and falsifying state records, sentenced her to 15 years in federal prison. Desmond Sterling, despite his vast wealth and aggressive legal maneuvering, could not escape the wire fraud and conspiracy charges. The $2 million transfer proved his direct participation in the cover-up. He received a 10-year sentence, marking a spectacular downfall for the once untouchable billionaire. The reading of the sentences offered no sense of triumphant joy. The courtroom remained solemn, acknowledging the profound damage inflicted upon multiple lives. I watched the bailiffs place handcuffs on my parents, listening to the metallic click, echoing in the quiet room. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The people being led away were strangers. The parents I thought I knew, the people who demanded my loyalty and obedience, had never truly existed. They were simply architects of an illusion. I walked out of the federal courthouse and stepped into the bright Chicago afternoon. The air felt clean, sharp, and full of possibility. I did not look back at the building holding the architects of my suffering. I had a daughter waiting for me. I had a life to rebuild. The destruction was complete. It was time to focus entirely on creation. 1 year later, the Chicago wind carried a crisp autumn chill, a stark reminder of the night this entire ordeal began. But the air no longer felt threatening. It felt like a clean slate. The federal sentences had been handed down, sealing Brenda and Gregory away for decades. The media frenzy subsided, replacing scandalous headlines with the quiet, steady rhythm of a new reality. I stood in the kitchen of my small house pouring a second cup of coffee. The pale yellow walls I painted myself felt brighter today. The height chart marked in pencil on the doorframe had new lines added tracking Maya's rapid growth over the past 12 months. I traced the top mark, smiling softly. The most profound shift following the trial was not the incarceration of my abusers, but the restitution awarded by the federal court. The $2 million offshore account Gregory established with Desmond's blood money was seized entirely. The judge ordered the funds transferred to Sienna as direct compensation for medical fraud, emotional distress, and the kidnapping of her child. Sienna did not take the money and vanish. The trauma of the past 8 years forged a bond between us, forged in survival and undeniable truth. We faced a monumental decision regarding Maya's future. The state offered to officially transfer custody to Sienna, dissolving the fraudulent adoption paperwork Gregory orchestrated. But Sienna recognized the reality of the situation. I had raised Maya since her first breath. I was the only mother she knew. Tearing her away from my home to enforce a biological claim would only inflict further trauma on an innocent child. We sat at this very kitchen island months ago, navigating the delicate, complex emotions of motherhood. We chose to rewrite the rules. We petitioned the family court for a joint custody arrangement, legally establishing us as co-parents. Maya now split her time between my house and the comfortable condominium Sienna purchased with the restitution funds. She had 2 mothers. 2 women who refused to let her become collateral damage in a billionaire's extortion scheme. A sharp knock on the front door interrupted my thoughts. I set my coffee mug down and pulled the door open, revealing Jamal standing on the porch holding a thick stack of legal briefs and a box of pastries from a local bakery. Jamal looked entirely different from the stressed, constrained corporate attorney he was a year ago. The tailored suits remained, but the heavy burden of the sterling legacy had vanished. His divorce from Lauren was finalized swiftly, leaving her with nothing but the tarnished family name she so desperately clung to. He resigned from his father's corrupt firm, launching an independent practice, specializing in prosecuting corporate fraud and defending victims of predatory real estate acquisitions. He used his intimate knowledge of the elite underworld to dismantle the very systems that built his father's empire. I brought the updated trust fund documents, Jamal announced, stepping inside and setting the pastries on the counter. The state finalized the transfer of Sienna's restitution. The funds are legally shielded from any future civil claims Desmond's remaining cronies might attempt to file. I thanked him, pulling 2 plates from the cabinet. Jamal had become a fixture in our lives, transitioning from an unlikely ally during the crisis to a steadfast friend in the aftermath. He offered pro bono legal counsel to Sienna, ensuring her newfound wealth was protected and structured to provide long-term security for Maya's education. "How is the medical school application process progressing?" Jamal asked, taking a seat at the island. I glanced at the thick envelope resting near my laptop. I spent the last 8 years burying my dream of becoming a surgeon, believing the sacrifice was a mandatory consequence of compassion. I believed the Northwestern premed scholarship I abandoned at 17 was a closed chapter. Sienna changed that narrative. The moment the restitution funds cleared, she insisted on establishing an educational trust specifically for me. She refused to accept no for an answer, stating bluntly that she was returning the future my parents stole. I submitted the final essays last night. I replied, feeling a surge of genuine excitement replace the familiar anxiety. I have an admissions interview scheduled for next week. The admissions board was surprisingly receptive to an applicant who spent her 20s managing extreme crisis scenarios. Jamal smiled, taking a bite of a pastry. You have more practical trauma management experience than half the surgical residents in the city, Chloe. They would be foolish to reject you. The front door swung open again, followed by the chaotic, energetic sounds of an 8-year-old returning from a weekend excursion. Sienna walked in holding Maya's hand, looking vibrant and remarkably healed. The constant terror that haunted her eyes a year ago was replaced by a calm, confident strength. Maya dropped her backpack and ran straight to the kitchen island, wrapping her arms around my waist. I hugged her tightly, burying my face in her hair. She chattered excitedly about a science museum exhibit she visited with Sienna, outlining a complex theory about dinosaur fossils. I listened intently, marveling at the simple, profound joy of watching her grow up completely unaware of the darkness we defeated to secure this moment. Sienna greeted Jamal, discussing the final details of the trust fund paperwork. We operated as a functional, unconventional family unit, bound not by blood or marriage contracts, but by a shared commitment to protection and truth. Later that evening, after Jamal left and Maya was asleep, I sat alone on the back porch, wrapped in a warm blanket, watching the Chicago skyline twinkle in the distance. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an automated notification from the state corrections facility indicating that a prisoner had attempted to add my number to their approved contact list. Gregory. I stared at the notification. For 25 years, my entire existence revolved around seeking validation from people who viewed me as a convenient utility. I structured my life around their demands, absorbing their cruelty under the mistaken belief that endurance equated to love. I tapped the screen, explicitly rejecting the contact request and permanently blocking the automated system. I did not feel anger. I did not feel a lingering need for revenge. I felt a profound, liberating emptiness regarding my biological parents. They were serving their sentences confined to concrete cells, stripped of their wealth and their social armor. They would spend the next decade confronting the stark reality of their choices. Their consequences were entirely their own. I turned my phone off, setting it on the small wooden table next to my chair. The narrative that family is defined strictly by genetics is a dangerous illusion often weaponized to demand unconditional loyalty from victims of abuse. My parents shared my DNA, but they offered me nothing but exploitation and betrayal. The family I built in the aftermath of their destruction looked entirely different. It consisted of a biological mother who fought through paralyzing terror to find her child. It included a brilliant attorney who burned his own corrupt legacy to the ground to expose the truth. It centered around an 8-year-old girl who laughed freely, completely safe from the predators who tried to erase her. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath of the crisp night air. I was 26 years old. I was a mother, a survivor, and soon a medical student. The years my parents stole could never be returned, but the future they tried to extinguish was finally entirely my own. I had closed the darkest chapter of my life, not with a quiet surrender, but with a calculated, devastating execution of the truth. The nightmare was over. The morning belonged to me. I often sit on my porch and think about the terrified 17-year-old girl who accepted a stolen infant to save her from an imaginary orphanage. I wish I could go back and tell her that her empathy was a rare gift, but she was handing it to thieves. Looking back at the wreckage of my parents' empire and the beautiful reality built from its ashes, I carry 3 profound truths with me. First, biology does not grant immunity from accountability. Society conditions us to believe that blood requires unyielding loyalty. It is a calculated lie predators use to keep their victims compliant and silent. Family is never defined by shared genetic markers. Family is defined by the people who stand between you and the fire, not the ones who push you into the flames to stay warm. Sienna, Jamal, and Maya are my family because we chose each other in the trenches. Second silence is the primary currency of corruption. Men like Desmond Sterling and master manipulators like my parents thrive because they count on your fear of causing a public scene. They weaponize your desire for peace, expecting you to shrink away from conflict. The exact moment you refuse to carry their dark secrets, the moment you lay the raw evidence on the marble table, their entire foundation shatters. The truth does not require a prestigious law degree or a vast offshore bank account. It only requires a voice brave enough to speak it out loud. Third, a stolen past does not dictate a forfeited future. For 8 long years, I believed my medical career was a permanent casualty of circumstance. I accepted the false narrative that my existence was meant to be a quiet, endless sacrifice. But timelines are arbitrary constructs. You can take your life back at 25, 40, or 60. You always possess the right to reclaim the dreams selfish people forced you to abandon. Today, my stethoscope rests on the study desk right next to Maya's colorful crayon drawings. The predators who orchestrated my ruin are locked in concrete cells, serving decades for their greed. I am no longer a hostage to familial guilt or manufactured obligation. I am the architect of my own destiny. If you are listening to this and carrying the heavy weight of someone else's toxic secrets, I want you to know that you hold the power to drop that burden today. You can walk away from the table where you are only invited to serve. Thank you for walking through this long journey with me and witnessing the fallout. If you found strength or clarity in my experience, please like this video and subscribe to Olivia Stories Revenge. Share your own battles in the comments below because your voice matters. Remember to always protect your peace and stand your ground. I will see you in the next story.